This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. European markets are down again. The tariff turmoil continues. Our understanding of it increases even as the situation plummets. But it's big picture time today, isn't it? The King is currently in Italy, being glad-handed by the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, whose political roots are in Mussolini's fascist movement. I don't think she deserves that label at this point in time, but it focuses the mind, doesn't it? Could the King say no? I find myself thinking increasingly about the White Rose in Nazi Germany, the 5 students and 1 professor who led a sort of peaceful, progressive, intellectual resistance movement against the obvious evils of Nazism. But apart from them, there was precious little dissent post-1936. And until, of course, Hitler annexed, which is something of a euphemism, Sudetenland, and subsequently invaded Poland, the rest of the world was relatively relaxed about Adolf Hitler. I think Churchill possibly the only one who wasn't. I know that's incredibly simplistic, and I'm not claiming to have all the history. But, you know, well, if you don't know, there's pages and pages of writing you can read to refresh your memory or to educate yourself. The Daily Mail, still a massive newspaper back then, was incredibly, the owner was a huge fan of Adolf Hitler and of Oswald Mosley and the Black Shirts. Huge fan, exchanging personal correspondence, I think with the Führer himself, but certainly with incredibly senior members of the Nazi Party. And the obvious comfort that much of the ruling class in this country had with the prospect of fascism was crystal clear until the imperial ambitions appeared, until Hitler started actually invading sovereign territories, at which point, of course, everybody begins to worry that they might be next. But there were people in this country, very high up people in this country, who were hoping for a Nazi defeat of the Allies, and essentially there's all sorts of stories, isn't there? Off the top of my head, Whiteley's in Bayswater and Senate House just by Russell Square are both buildings that it was claimed Hitler wanted for his headquarters in the event of the Nazis defeating the Allies in the Second World War. I think there's one in Liverpool as well. Don't at me. You're going to at me, aren't you? You're going to at me. But there's no way they can all be true, but one of them might be. I'm not sure. Senate House is a magnificent building if you've never seen it. It stands in for Bertie Wooster's New York home in the Jeeves and Wooster, the Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie Jeeves and Wooster. That's what a magnificent Art Deco edifice it is. But I digress. Max Hastings is a historian and writer, former editor of the Daily Telegraph before it went bonkers. I don't know him personally, but I'm always slightly troubled when I turn to his analysis and find it brilliant because on an incredibly personal level, he sacked my late father as a journalist. So I bear him enormous ill will for that single act. But it's not obviously enough to dilute in any way the quality of his commentary or his expertise as a historian. And he points out today that sensible people in the United States, he provides a really helpful catalogue, actually, of just some of the things that speak to the F word, that speak to the facts of the matter. Thoughtful Americans, he writes, use the F word, fascism, even while we are still cautious about doing so. And we are, aren't we? I am. I've used the word probably a little bit too liberally over the years. We all have. You've probably called a parking ticket inspector. What do we call them? A traffic warden. You've probably called a traffic warden a fascist in your mind, silently, if not actually out loud, with little bits of spittle coming out of your mouth because you're so furious about. Called a teacher he's such a fascist. Have you called your boss a fascist? I don't know. Who have you called a fascist recently? But we do use the word liberally, but not actually politically very often. We don't really have fascism. We haven't really had since Oswald Mosley proper fascism on the march in this country. We've got some sort of pound shop fascists who flirt with it, but not the real deal yet. And of course, the United States hadn't had the real deal until Donald Trump got back into the White House. And even now, I mean, this might well prove to be the topic the question that I end up asking you in 7 minutes' time. In fact, work on the presumption that it will be and book your place on the switchboard early. Is it time to use the F word? And what I want you to give me is your best explanation of why, because there are so many stories that I don't think you will be aware of. The National Security Agency, the head of the National Security Agency and US Cyber Command was purged last week. Why? Because a far-right conspiracy theorist called Laura Loomer, who now apparently advises the president, accused them of disloyalty, posting on Elon Musk's sewer that they have been disloyal to President Trump. That is why they have been fired. The head of government ethics has been sacked. The president is set to become the very first president in US history to vastly enrich himself while holding office. I don't believe we have the beginnings of a proper understanding of what's going on with cryptocurrency and other issues. As Max Hastings points out, the government, sometimes, I don't know, I'm 53. I was about to say I'm only 53. I don't feel like a grown-up. There's another phone in for another day. Do you feel like a grown-up? Do you ever start feeling like a grown-up? So on days like this, and you know what I do for a living, and sometimes I take punts, and usually they turn out to be right. Not always, but on politics, on understanding extremism in our midst, I've got a pretty good record, but I don't feel like a grown-up. I read a grown-up, and I suppose because he was my dad's boss for a few years, I think of Max Hastings as a grown-up. I read a grown-up, and I think, God, he's right. Even as he said things I already thought were true, to see them espoused by a grown-up, I hope that doesn't make me sound silly, but to see them espoused by a grown-up frightens me more than it does when I arrive at these conclusions myself. Does that make sense? It's like, I think Donald Trump is a fascist. I think that the evidence is absolutely incontrovertible. I think it's undeniable. I think the examples are legion. But it doesn't quite land with the same thud of horror as when I see a writer of Max Hastings's stature arriving at a very similar conclusion. I don't know that he actually goes there himself, but he points out that thoughtful Americans are using the word, and we are cautious of doing so. We must abandon any pretense that what is happening to the United States falls within the parameters of the normal, as we have known it. It does not. Fear and hatred are the tire levers in Trump's toolkit. Thoughtful Americans use the F word, fascism, even while we are still cautious about doing so. Is it time to stop being cautious? 0345 6060 973. And that's nice, actually. I do thank you, Richard. I love people who can find something funny in even the darkest of times. He says, you saying fascist so much has me remembering the young ones. Please spare and share a thought for the great Rick Mail. So Rick Mail, a wonderful example, a comedy student, a fictional student, called everyone a fascist. I think he called his breakfast cereal fascist on occasion. So that's what I mean about the two uses of the word. There's the liberal use of the word, by which I simply mean like a liberal sprinkling. We use it liberally, not a political. But we really pause, don't we, before we use it in its real sense. Is it time to use it now? 0345. You can get in early, actually. I haven't finished. Don't be ridiculous. It's 12 minutes past 10. But if you already know what your answer to this question is and what evidence you're going to provide to tell me that I'm right or to tell me that I'm wrong, the number you need is 0345 6060 973. The list, of course, is almost endless, and there will be stuff that you are quite possibly not aware of. It's now a month since the administration detained and disappeared a green card holder, a lawful permanent resident of the United States of America, swept up, sent to El Salvador in circumstances that look like a sale, that look like a essential sale of human beings. And that is fascistic. Shutting down all manner of institutions, the laying off of staff, particularly the rewriting of history to sort of remove contributions from non-white people. This is a state capture. That's the only phrase that you can use. Judges are under attack. Judges who do not do what Donald Trump wants are in all sorts of trouble. Lawyers who have previously taken cases against the administration or against Donald Trump personally are being frozen out of government work. Some law firms are agreeing to undertake $100 million worth for free, to work for the government for free, simply to stay in favor with the White House. Any organization associated with past litigation against Trump personally are to be denied government contracts. 500 law firms have protested, but some of the biggest have already surrendered. As callers explained to us yesterday, we are looking at a situation that is like what happened in Russia. Max Hastings again makes this point, and again, I don't think I'm ever going to grow out of this. Again, it shocks me more when I see a grown-up saying it. This is what Putin did. You say to the oligarchs, make as much money as you like, but if you mess with my politics, I will break you. I think it was Mussolini who said that corporatism is fascism, or that fascism is corporatism, that they are the same thing. That is why business leaders, the biggest business leaders in the world, were queuing up prior to the inauguration to just work out what it was they had to do to stay in Trump's good books, to keep him sweet. Scooping people up off the streets for the, quotes, crime, end quotes, of having written articles critical of Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip, or expressing solidarity with Palestinian victims of Israeli violence. Netanyahu wanted for alleged war crimes by the International Criminal Court, getting his toes tickled in the Oval Office this week. And yet we are still cautious about using the word. Thoughtful Americans use the F word, fascism, even while we are still cautious about doing so. That's it. Tom's got the quote. I think Tom actually sent this just before I said it out loud, so it's good to know that great minds, Tom, either that or an echo chamber. Fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism, because it is a merger of state and corporate power. And I don't think that we do anything, do we, until they invade Canada. Or invade. I don't know. I don't know what the next bit of the story is, but I do know that it's time to start using the F word. As Mark reminded us yesterday from Brighton, you go back to the 1970s and this man was trying to stop black people from renting apartments in his buildings. I can't imagine anybody wanting to disagree with the proposition that it is time to use the F word. This is fascism. So there are two questions. Is it time to start using that word? 0345 6060 973. Probably three questions. You always know when I say there are only two questions that there's going to be at least 72. So is it time to start using that word? Why are we cautious still, despite all the evidence? And the question I don't think anyone can answer. What does it change? I don't think it changes anything. I heard an extraordinary thing on the radio this morning. Mrs. O'Brien is away, so I get a little bit of insomnia sometimes when my wife is not at home. And when I've got insomnia, I turn on the World Service. And there was an extraordinary moment about 3 o'clock this morning. I only had it on for 5 minutes. And it was one of those mad moments where I almost sat bolt upright in bed, because they were speaking. It was an archive interview with the Daily Express's Berlin correspondent. It was Anglo-German, one of those wonderful voices. And his contacts were so impeccable that on the night that the Reichstag was set alight, just before the election, and it delivered victory to Hitler, who was already chancellor but not in full control of the levers of power. And he was describing what happened in that moment, how normal it was. He was with Hitler, as Hitler said to not Hindenburg himself, but one of the senior, sort of more conservative, less extremist members of the then government. He said this could be a wonderful opportunity for us. They were blaming it on communists when the German parliament got set on fire, blaming it on communists who were an electoral threat, a political threat to what I guess we'd call the fascists, or the Nazis. And in that moment, diabolical genius saying this is going to be great for us. And of course, what the Daily Express correspondent reported was a very, very senior, I wish I could remember the exact title of the fellow, but a very, very senior member of the government who wasn't a Nazi. No, he was a Nazi, a very senior member of the Nazi movement, saying, do you know, this is exactly the sort of crazy thing that our lot might have done, as in the Nazis might have set the fire in order to score electoral points. And it just made me realise that until Sudetenland and Poland, in the United Kingdom, the threat was quite a niche view. The Churchillian warnings about what Nazism represent, what fascism represented on continental Europe were regarded as eccentric or outlandish. Probably woke, actually, had the word been deployed in that ludicrous way back then. Winston Churchill would have been called woke for his warnings about fascism. He would, wouldn't he? Oh boy, there's a moment. Winston Churchill would almost certainly have been called woke by the kind of newspapers, I'm looking at you, Daily Mail, who were bigging up Adolf Hitler until pretty much the last possible moment. So why are we cautious about using the word? 0345 6060973. Is it time to use the word? And crucially, and this is where I want you to do a bit of work, I've given you some some examples. I haven't given you all of them. What do you think proves it? What from the last 2 weeks do you think proves? The last 2 months, or the last 2 weeks, the last 2 hours. What do you think proves the case or disproves the case? What is the killer piece of evidence for the prosecution or evidence for the defense that Donald Trump does or does not, that this administration does or does not deserve to be described as fascist? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 10:20.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. John in Edinburgh writes, James, you are a fully grown-up adult to me, despite being 17 years younger, so please call a spade a spade. Trump is as fascistic as it gets. You are correct with your label. Well, I think I am, but I want evidence again today. Jimmy says, calling him a fascist is like saying Brexit was objectively bad. The truth hurts the feelings of the people who chose it. So in the interest of stopping those stubborn people digging in further, we, the reasonable, walk softly around them in fear of what might come next if we tell the truth. If Starmer says fascist, we will feel it financially. It's very true. 2 journalists in my thoughts today. The first, and thank you for reminding me of his name, is Rothay Reynolds. And if you can find that footage that the BBC has in its archives, it is absolutely extraordinary. I didn't know he was a friend of one of my all-time favourite writers. I know what I'm doing after the show today. Saki, just an incredible writer. But Rothay Reynolds was the journalist, I think, in... one of them. He's not the one I'm thinking of, but he's another journalist that was capable of holding the gaze of Adolf Hitler. And then the other one is Dorothy Thompson, a writer who, wrote a lot of things, but my introduction to her came from an article she wrote for Harper's Magazine in August of 1941 under the title Who Goes Nazi? She just looked around a room in the United States of America and tried to identify who would go Nazi. It's chilling, because the room you're in now, go on, have a look round. It's scary, isn't it? Are you in company? Are you in the car? In an office? Which ones do you think? If we had fascist leaders here, if the United Kingdom went the way that the United States is going, which of your colleagues would be cheering it? And let me tell you exactly how Dorothy Thompson put it, because it's an absolutely extraordinary piece of journalism. The born Nazis, the Nazis whom democracy itself has created, the certain-to-be fellow travellers, i.e. those who are perfectly capable of closing their eyes or holding their nose to what they are part of or witnessing, and those who never, under any conceivable circumstances, would become Nazis. 4 categories. Born, let's say fascists, the fascists whom democracy itself has created, the certain-to-be fellow travellers, and those who would never, under any conceivable circumstances, become fascists. I think the final category is really small. much smaller than we ever realise when we're studying this stuff at school or pontificating about it on the radio. I don't know how small it is, but America is finding out. Cassina is in Paris, France. Is it time to? I don't know why I said. Well, I said France because you could have been in Texas, I suppose. Is it time to use the F word?
Hi, yeah, it's Ksenia. I think we're long overdue to use the F word. We have been seeing signs of it for since the first Trump presidency because of the people he surrounded himself with, such as Stephen Miller, Sebastian Gorka, and that, and now we are seeing it in full display, especially with the treatment of migrants, with the treatment of U.S. citizens and green card holders who are deported and disappeared, and some even kidnapped off the streets. So, when I think of J.D. Vance doing that speech in which he is accusing the U.K. and Europe of stifling free speech, and they have literally kidnapped a woman from the street, revoking her visa because she spoke out against what I consider to be a genocide in Gaza. That is definitely not free speech, and it is, in my opinion, fascism.
And I mean, a couple of the people that you've mentioned were popping up on the media over here. I don't know what the situation is in France until relatively recently, and probably still will, because you lead us immediately to the question of what do we do? I mean, how do the sensible people, or what Max Hastings describes in the Times newspaper today as the reasonable people who respect limits? He's talking about the ones in the United States, but what do we do? What do you do in France, where you have Le Pen's party on the rise? You look at Italy, where the King of England is currently breaking bread with Giorgia Meloni, the political descendant of Benito Mussolini. So exactly. I don't know what happens next. I don't know. I don't think, and it's not a great observation in terms of optimism and uplifting, but I don't think anybody can really do anything.
I think as long as we're complacent toward it and we treat America with a different, we measure it with a different yardstick. You were asking before, why are we so reluctant to call it fascism?
Yes.
Only because it's America. No other reason. Because if it was an Eastern European country, I come from Eastern Europe, or if it was some smaller country, we would be very quick to fascism. So it's just because it's America, and as long as world leaders and European leaders are complacent towards what is happening because it's America, the trouble we're in, I believe, is going to get deeper and deeper.
And of course, what that trouble looks like is something that we've had a look at over the weeks, but nobody can answer. Nobody really knows, even on a simple question like the tariffs, what is going to happen next. And thank you, Ksenia. In the context of this point I keep making about nobody, I don't believe a single person, we're 2 months in, I don't believe a single person is across everything. I really don't. I think there'll be stuff that's gone on that you don't know about. Ksenia refers to a couple of examples. There'll be stuff Harriet Tubman I spoke about yesterday, the key, if you like, architect of the secret railroad by which escaped slaves could make their way from the south to the north. But the Parks organization has removed her photograph from its front page, or from the front page of the article explaining what the Underground Railroad was. And claiming it was just a wonderful, without even mentioning slavery, a wonderful example of black-white cooperation. It is mad what is happening. And I wonder what you'd put at the top of the list. Ksenia goes for the snatch squads, people scooping up people from the streets of the United States of America for having said things, for having exercised their freedom of speech, for having committed thought crimes, scooping them up, locking them up. The man who was accidentally deported. You know what the Supreme Court is? This is another example of stuff you might not know about. So a man was deported to, he's a Salvadorian man. He's from El Salvador. And he was deported to, I'll tell you where in a minute, by accident. He's in El Salvador's maximum security terrorism confinement center. He has done absolutely nothing wrong. His wife is a US citizen. He has a green card. He is a legal resident. He's not accused of anything. The judges or courts in the United States of America have essentially demanded that he be returned, and the government is resisting it. They originally said that he was there as the consequence of an administrative error. They're now claiming, with no evidence whatsoever, that he's a gang member. And you know what the Supreme Court did? The Supreme Court just blocked a lower court's order that required the deported man to be brought back. So they've deported an innocent man by accident, and they are now fighting calls from judges to bring him back. I don't even know why. I wouldn't even know how to begin to answer the question. Why? What does it matter? We're going to deport all the people who deserve to be deported, but this guy didn't, so we're going to bring him back. Even if the definition of deserved is dodgy, at least. But that means people like this. That means they are appealing to people who want someone to be deported for the crime of being from El Salvador. Is that at the top of your list of fascist evidence for the prosecution? The deporting of innocent people, or the loading of the Supreme Court to deny the most basic of rights to people? What would you point at first? And where do you even begin? The rewriting of history for me is probably bigger historically than the individual experiences and abuses. More of your calls coming up. Thomas Watts has your headlines first.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Everyone's a critic. Thank you, Dave. It's Sudetenland, not Sudeten. Do you know, when you correct me, it actually makes the job of saying things correctly harder, because it creates a sort of glitch in my brain. So I then have a little internal dialogue every time I approach a word that I've mispronounced in the past, and I often jump the wrong way. I don't know why. It's probably a German word for it. Sudetenland. My apologies. Thank you, Dave. Chris reminds us, and I think you sent this before I mentioned it, but Harriet Tubman's paintings being changed or removed from public websites. Yes, you're right. John says, why is it a big deal for you to call Trump a fascist? We all know what he's doing. To me, fascism was something specific to the environment of 1930s Europe. I know it had offshoots in the US and South America at the time. And Andrew answers that question there of why would they not bring back this man who has been incorrectly deported, instead changing their story. I think, hasn't J.D. Vance, I may be getting two stories mixed up, but hasn't J.D. Vance said he had some traffic violations, so he wasn't innocent after all? I think he said that about someone, but Andrew points out they can't admit they're wrong. That's actually one of the psychological substratas of fascism. You can't admit that you're wrong. People who can never admit that they're wrong. If you were looking at Dorothy Thompson's article about who goes Nazi, that I reckon would be a qualifying factor. If you can never ever admit that you're wrong and you've offered your support to these dudes, what do you become next? One of them. Graham's in Watford. Graham, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, I was just interested in the choice of the F word,
yes.
And it made me think, as I'm one of the young ones' generation, so it was something that was bandied around quite,
Yes, it became meaningless in a way as a concept, and because we thought that those days were over when it meant something.
Exactly, and also it's a definition that instigated in the first part of the last century. So it made me think, well, is James right on this one? So I went to good old AI and picked up the definition of fascism, and absolutely you'll bang on, because the definitions are the first one being authoritarian leadership, the power concentrated in the hands of a single leader or ruling party. Tick. Ultra-nationalism, a belief of superiority of one's nation or ethnic group accompanied by xenophobia and racism. Yeah, I'll give that a tick. Suppression of dissent, tick. Militarism and violence, tick.
Well, I mean, if we bring January the 6th, sorry, I've talked over you, just to remind us all of January the 6th, which, was not part of this administration, but is very much part of Trump's fascism.
Absolutely, and then the last one being the one of good old propaganda and state control of messaging, which is tick. So I started off thinking that maybe it was an out-of-date a terminology that needed refreshing for today's society and what's going on in the world, but I'm afraid you're absolutely right. It is absolutely the F word.
And it's a full house on that. The final one being particularly chilling because, of course, Simon Marks, normally very, very sober and measured, a brilliant journalist, but genuinely going quite early to point out that they're filling up the press conferences with sycophants and creeps, and actually keeping proper journalists out of the room, which is how you seed propaganda. It is Well, there you go. Thank you for that, Graham. I'll remember that. I mean, there are various lists. I think Umberto Eco put together a list of signs to look out for fascism. But of course, what we've learned about AI recently is that it's a cruncher. So that would have crunched all of the tick boxes, all of the checklists into those 4 central points. And I think you're going to struggle to challenge Graham's conclusion that all 4 of those boxes have just been ticked. And remember, as I say goodbye to Graham, it opens up a phone line for you rather than sending me texts, politely pointing out that you can't get through. Just hang on until I say goodbye to Graham and then hit 03456060973 or hit redial. Dave's in Bromsgrove. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First of all, you are my daily dose of grown-up, so thank you for that.
I don't know if I'm comfortable being cast as a grown-up, Dave, but if the cap fits, if the cap fits.
Compared with me, I'm a musician. Right, so 2 things made me pick up the phone. First of all, your original question. I grew up in the 70s, and I was on anti-Nazi League marches, right. And so I've heard the word fascism used in and out, and being a Rick Mail fan, all of that. Yes. And I think you sort of said it just now to Graham that overusing it devalues it. So if we use it to describe a teacher, then it might be a caricature, but it devalues it when we mean it and we see it for real. And we are seeing it for real now, as proven by Graham just now when he ticked off the definitions of fascism. And now is the time, I think, to be saying it absolutely and carefully and measuredly. Yes, we are witnessing fascism. And I say that having been wary as I've grown older about using it.
And that's why we are. I mean, that's where the caution comes from, isn't it? I guess we're back to Francis Fukuyama, aren't we? I guess the reason why we could, or one of the reasons why we could just throw it around the room, or Rick Mail could use it to great comic effect, was because we thought that was over. We thought history had ended. The Cold War was over. The 2 extremes had been vanquished, and the sort of progressive liberal democracy was supreme. We know that's not true, but that means that it's time to revisit the language of the previous eras. And top of the list of words that we've stopped using is fascist. Could we mount any defence of him not being a fascist? Could we say he's not a fascist because ...
Well, that's I would say. I mean, he isn't invading anywhere yet, I suppose.
Yeah. But Hitler was a fascist before he went into Sudetenland or before he went into Poland. Hitler was a Nazi.
You can have a non-invasive fascist. I guess. Can I just tell you a very quick story in relation to the fascists in the room?
Yes.
I work in schools. I'm not a teacher, but I was working in schools, and this is over a decade ago. And there was a brilliant history teacher who interrupted my workshop in the school by saying, just before Mr. Howard starts, what I'd like you to do is, I've got some news for you. We've been picked to be part of a programme, a trailblazing part of a programme for changes in schools. And she proceeded to read out, without telling them, what the Nazis decided to do with schools about separating out the kids into different religions, about girls doing cooking and everything. And the kids slowly started looking at each other saying, this cannot be true. Yeah. This can't be true. And slowly, one by one, they said, no, I'm not coping with this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. Now, when she'd been through and she finally revealed what was going on, I sat them in a circle and said, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to stand up and sit down at the point that you would say no. And they were all brilliantly honest. Most of them stood standing and said, I think I'd go along with this. I think I would go along with this because of peer pressure. I wouldn't want to let my family down. I wouldn't want to risk my career prospects. I think I would be still standing when they said that the Jews have to be taken away. In real life, if I didn't know the history, if I didn't know what had happened, I would probably be still standing. And they were really brave and courageous in saying that because they realised what they were saying. And
I think that's why I said a moment ago that the number of people who would never under any circumstances go along with it is probably tiny.
Absolutely. And I think unless we say we're now looking at fascism now, then we're in danger of casting ourselves in that group.
Has there ever been a historical moment where a government was fascistic and didn't have ambitions beyond its own borders. So Trump, Putin, of course, is also a fascist, but he makes no secret of his imperial. I mean, he mounts illegal invasions like it's going out of fashion. Has there ever been a historical example of an essentially fascistic regime that doesn't have imperial ambitions or doesn't have designs on other territories?
I don't think it can be possible because by definition the psychological makeup of a fascist is someone who wants to control as far and as wide as possible.
It could turn in on itself, though. That point, Graham's fourth thing, or the third one about militarism and violence. In a way, Trump is going to set American upon American in the context of militarism and violence. The comments about Greenland and Canada can't be ignored. They absolutely can't be ignored. But militarism and violence doesn't have to be outward looking. It can be inward looking. It often is inward looking.
Yeah, generally, I think I'm not much of a historian, but I think that is often what tears them apart in the end.
Franco, Spain might be an example of what I'm looking for, but of course, you don't know what would have happened had it sustained for longer, or if energy hadn't been taken up fighting civil war. I don't know. Mugabe, I think just too mad really to be a fascist in a sense. I don't. And again, who's really expert enough to compare all of these administrations, all of these regimes? But the question of, I mean, this is the phone-in I don't want to do. Is that question that I mentioned to you earlier, which happily so far no one has elected to answer. What does it actually change? Yes, he's a fascist. We still need a trade deal. The national interest demands that we keep him sweet. Yes, he's a fascist, but we're sending a delegation. What do you think the conversation is in Tokyo at the moment? Yes, he's a fascist. Well, he's a fascist or he's a blithering idiot. Of course, it's not mutually exclusive. He could be both. The administration is fascist. What they are doing, the actions we are describing are, I think, inarguably fascistic. Whether Donald Trump can even spell the word is moot. So what are they saying in Japan? Well, look, he's obviously mad. This is the words that The Economist used to describe the economic policies. I'd missed. It came out on April the 4th. Someone sent it to me earlier today. I couldn't believe my eyes. The Economist. You know, I did not a punch puller, but my goodness me, dry. Not given to hyperbole. Not an organ that gets overexcited about things. The language they've used to describe what is going on, which I'll share with you shortly, is extraordinary. But that's just looking at the economics. You look at the politics, you look at the actions, and it is fascistic. But what does it change? Who's going to sit down if we're back in Dave's classroom? Who's going to sit down? Can Keir Starmer sit down? I don't think he can. We need a trade deal. We need to keep him sweet. European Union is not sitting down. I mean, it's not standing up proudly and saying, with this I am supremely comfortable. Mark Carney possibly is the only one who's already sat down. So what does it change? Even if we all agree he's a fascist, what does it change? What should it change, Simon asks. It's 10:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49 is the time. So a gold star for everyone who answered Franco to my last question. A fascist regime that didn't have imperial ambition. I think Lewis Goodall might have been first out of the blocks on that one, but then he has my private phone number, which means I may have noticed it before I noticed your message. But, I mean, fascist regimes often come from a position of grievance or vulnerability. You know, whether it is unhappiness with the Versailles settlement after the First World War, the idea that you march into a position of untrammeled power overnight by using the tools of democracy, that's what is arguably unique about this, about Trump's situation, is that he has, as we've said before, cast himself as an enemy of all of the institutions and traditions and all of the history that has actually rendered the office he now holds so powerful. That's what I look forward to reading historians of the future trying to unravel that. But the question of whether or not it is now time to stop worrying about the F word, using the F word, maybe not worry yet about whether it actually changes anything. But as Max Hastings writes this morning, we are still cautious about doing so. Why? And should we be? 10:50 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Tim is in Copenhagen. Tim, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
First of all, thank you for what you do. You do it very well, and it's very, very important. So thank you very much for that.
Very kind.
Second of all, I honestly believe
that we're all getting far too overcomplicated about Donald Trump, because if you look at it just very, very straight on, the man's an idiot. Yeah. I mean, and by that I mean unintelligent. He can't apply new situations with new theories because he can't make that extrapolation. When you join that in with the fact that he is, and please excuse my language,
Careful.
the bastard son of Roy Cohn.
Okay, I'll let that pass because it has a dictionary definition. But there's no, you don't, and it's a quote. But be careful.
Yeah, I promise I will, and I do apologise for anybody. But Roy Cohn basically said, never admit, never give in, never said you've done anything wrong.
Yes.
These are the things that Donald Trump has done from day one. Now, the fact that he's an extremely unintelligent man, coupled with the fact that he's a psychopath and believes that he's very, very intelligent, means you're never going to get anywhere.
Well, yeah,
and he's also surrounded by people who are just milking money from him.
No, I know. I mean,
they're not going to do anything.
Respectfully, this isn't a ticking off. You weren't listening yesterday, were you?
No, I wasn't.
So that was yesterday's show.
Oh, sorry.
That's absolutely fine. I mean, it's incredible
that you wasted your time.
You haven't.
Apologise.
No, you haven't wasted our time. It's oddly sort of reassuring to know that the plates are still spinning, and of course you can listen back on Global Player. So we did yesterday. The importance of looking at everything through the lens of Donald Trump's flaws, failures, psychopathy, narcissism, whatever it may be. You can't understand anything unless you're looking through that lens. But I don't think when you look at the actual rewriting of history, the obvious example of state capture, the promotion of blatant propaganda, the silencing of dissent, the passion, the enthusiasm for violence and militarism. I don't think you can use any of the things you've said as a bulwark against the F word. Both things can be true. Both things can be true at the same time.
I understand that, but can you define someone as fascist if they themselves don't identify with fascism?
Yes, because you look at what they do. You judge them by their actions.
Okay.
I
absolutely give you that one.
That's the checklist.
Thanks for putting me in my place, because sometimes you need to do that.
No,
and why
I
we
need it
to
as
talk
well.
To people who are intelligent.
I need it as well, and sometimes I fall into the trap of presuming that everybody is listening to every minute of every 3-hour show with as much attention as Keith does. No sarcasm intended. 10:53 is the time. Thank you, Tim. And yes, I mean, all the things you said are true, but I don't think, and I wonder whether I would have come on the air today with this question if we hadn't had the show yesterday. Particularly Mark in Brighton's historical context of Trump's fascism is you're looking at the key constituent of fascism, the sort of ethno-nationalism, the idea that some people are by nature and innately better than others. And the fact that he didn't want to rent out his apartments to black people. You know exactly how Donald Trump feels about people of colour who aren't billionaires. I don't know for sure how he feels about people of colour who are billionaires, but it's unlikely to be exactly the same as the way he feels about people of colour who are white. Thank you, Tim. From Copenhagen to Hull, Andy's there. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Now, I rang up before you mentioned that very famous poster about what these signs of fascism are.
Yes.
Now, I know we've only got about 5-6 minutes before you get complained after the news, so we'll try rattling through them as quickly as possible.
I mean, it's a little presumptuous to think that you'll get all of those minutes, Andy, but let's suck it and see.
Well, okay. So, the first would be fraudulent elections. We've had the GOP try to throw as many people off the rolls as possible, including recently a judge has said they're allowed to take 60,000 off in one state.
This is the Umberto Eco checklist, I think.
Yes.
Or the one that's in the Museum of Fascism. They're both pretty good. But anyway, carry on. Let's see how many boxes we tick.
So we've got rampant cronyism. Well, we've just got Musk for that one. And obviously the corruption with Trump thinks he can go and do any crime he wants.
Yeah.
There's the obsession with crime and punishment.
Yeah.
Well, we've had that with, lock her up. And which also goes into the identification of enemies with the rapists are coming across the borders, and he wants to go and kill drug dealers. But simultaneously,
members of his administration and reports are that the alleged rapist and sex trafficker and money launderer is someone who benefited from an intervention, in Andrew Tate's case, from the American administration to the Romanian government. And the people that were released after the January the 6th attacks, in which actual police officers were killed. So, yes, that is that's another tick, isn't it? That's another box ticked.
Yeah, and then you've got disdain for intellectuals and the arts. Well, we've recently had him remove the board of one of the theatres.
The Kennedy Centre.
He disagreed with that.
It's not just a theatre, it's an epic hub of all manner of artistic endeavour, and he's made himself president despite never having visited a single show there.
Yes, all because of drag queens and all sorts of other excuses.
Yeah.
He's also removed the funding from quite a few universities because they support DEI or go and, things like climate change.
Yeah.
So he's withdrawn the funding from those, so basically saying they don't matter and you don't care. Labour power is being suppressed. Well, we've just seen quite a few of the unions get very upset with him over how he's treating their workers and pretty much saying that they can't do anything about it.
Yes. I don't know if that one... That's not as big a tick as some of the other boxes yet, is it? Because, I mean...
Yeah.
And, of course, you don't have to tick all the boxes to be a fascist. I think you just probably need a majority.
Yeah. Corporate power is protected. Well, again, we'll go back to Musk and his... removal of any oversight into him being able to blow up rockets or,
Well, and being given massive government contracts, huge government contracts are being awarded to Musk companies, even while they claim that they're sort of draining the swamp or whatever phrase they're using this week. That is your Putin-esque tactic of telling the oligarchs that they can do whatever they want as long as they never say boo to a presidential goose.
Mm-hmm. And then we've got religion. Well, we've seen that getting intertwined with governments because the GOP has basically said schools need to put the 10 Commandments in. Mm. And then obviously Trump is claiming, his followers are pretty much saying he's the next Jesus.
And on it goes. And you brought it in on time. And you've reminded me to check the other list, probably my favourite list that I used to run through quite regularly, which is Umberto Eco's 1995 essay, Fascism. And that's the guy that wrote The Name of the Rose. 14 general properties of fascist ideology. How many of those do you think you'd have to tick off to conclude that Donald Trump is a fascist? I might run through those 14 properties shortly. Should we squeeze in Kieran in Cork? I think we should. Kieran, what would you like to say?
I think that you should go back to post-truth alternative facts and start there, because that's where this started. I mean, this frog was boiled slowly and we're the frog, basically. That's the story. Mm. And if you take the media and kind of public discourse as kind of central to democracy, which it is, then we're all kind of suddenly doubting ourselves about is the world flat? You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And when it comes to journalists interviewing these guys, it's an impossible task because the slight boundary between disinformation and misinformation ceases to exist. It's gone.
And well-meaning journalists fall into the trap of false equivalence. Exactly.
Well,
on the other hand, of course, some people say that the Earth is flat. You see.
Exactly. And we all end up in this absurd place that we're in today. That's what I think, really. So it's important to remember that.
And is it fascist?
Fascism, whether it's authoritarian, totalitarian, fascist, really doesn't make a difference. It means that we no longer have democracy. We're no longer communicating with each other clearly, and we've lost all authority. The people have lost power. That's all that matters.
The people have lost power, even as, of course, they are being told that they are enjoying a golden era. And book bans as well, I think, have not been on our list. Looking at what the Naval Academy in Annapolis has literally purged from its shelves. How to be anti-racist. Who would want to learn how to be anti-racist? But also books by Maya Angelou. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Maya Angelou. It's just her autobiography describing her childhood during the Jim Crow era. No room for that in the Naval Academy. I've been given a list of all the books. I mean, it is unbelievable. Just purging them. They've got no place on administrative or government shelves. There it is. And Kieran's dead right. Go back to Kellyanne Conway. How many times have I said that to you? That moment right there was when we should have divided. That is when any attempt to both sides Trump or anybody in the British media or political establishment still saying warm things about him, long before January the 6th, long before he painted a target on his own vice president's back and set a murderous mob on him, long before that moment, when Kellyanne Conway described lies as alternative facts, I'm so naive. I really am. I thought It was all over then. I thought, I'll come to work tomorrow and everyone will be describing him in the way that I've been describing him so far. Anyone who calls himself a journalist, when a press secretary or an official spokesperson deploys a euphemism to describe blatant lies, that's the moment where we all join arms, where we all link arms. It doesn't matter what your personal politics are or what your partisanship is or what your professional history may be or what newspapers you might have worked for in the past or what broadcasts you might have contributed to. When the leader of the free world's own office start describing lies as alternative facts, that's where everybody links arms and starts resisting. And I came to work and I opened my newspapers and I listened to the radio and I was watching the television out of the corner of my eye, and absolutely nothing has changed. Nothing at all. Kellyanne Conway calling lies alternative facts, and everybody carried on as normal. I told you I was naive.
James O'Brien on LBC.
And it is 5 minutes after 11. I may keep that Umberto Eco list in the locker because we will no doubt be returning to this territory. But I mean, I, apart from someone called Greg, who's just sent me a very long text, nobody's really disputing the correct description of Donald Trump now, or at least his administration, as fascistic, which is quite the moment, isn't it? Who was expecting that? And in terms of those things that you thought would change everything, pal of mine's been in touch to say he thought that the Hollywood tapes, the Access Hollywood tapes, would do it when Donald Trump was boasting about sexually assaulting women. I think I did too, actually. But in terms of the journalistic profession, I thought that we would all link arms and start agreeing with each other after that alternative facts intervention. The footage. I mean, can you even remember whether you thought at the time that was Trump's campaign over? Here he is on a tape boasting about sexually assaulting women and laughing about it. How can he possibly stay on the presidential ticket? But he did. So many, what would you call them? Milestones? That sounds a bit portentous. So many moments on the path to ignominy. And as we've established, I think, in the first hour, almost certainly fascism. That's a word that you might have used in the context of the next story if it hadn't assumed a new weight in recent months. Because I am always slightly surprised by my initial reaction to developments that look a little bit totalitarian. I haven't entirely shrugged off the old mantra that if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. Even now, the last vestiges of it are being clung to by my subconscious. Even as I know that it can be a change of administration that turns a law you were comfortable with into a law that could get you locked up. Imagine if Suella Braverman had the power to lock people up for protesting against Israeli atrocities in Gaza. I think she probably would. Imagine if Liz Truss... Well, no, don't, actually. But the idea... I mean, I think the last time we had a conversation similar to this, it was facial recognition technology, which is being used in some really positive ways. Serial shoplifters simply won't be able to get into shops anymore because their details are on the system, and the minute they try to walk through the door, the alarm goes off. Rather than waiting for the alarm to go off as they're leaving the shop with lots of stolen goods and often unmolested because the security guards don't have the resources or the support to properly pursue them, rather than doing it that way round, they subscribe to prevention is better than cure and stick a camera in the front of the shop. And an alarm goes off on their way in so that they can be disbarred or they can be refused entry, which I think every company, certainly remember all the signs that used to be above pub doors, probably still are. Just not the sort of pubs I go to, old boy, where the management reserves the right to refuse admission or no football colours. That was another one, wasn't it? And this story is similar. Have you seen the film Minority Report? Have you seen the film Minority Report? I'm not sure I have. I can't open every hour with a contemplation on encroaching age like I did the last hour. And I think I did yesterday as well. That mysterious question of when it is that you start making weird noises every time you get up and out of or into a chair. And then, of course, we began today with the question of whether or not the population is divided into people who think they're grown-ups and people who will never think they're grown-ups. Some of you, I think, kind enough to suggest that I might be the grown-up in your life, but goodness me, that's a scary thought. But this is kind of similar. I haven't seen Minority Report, I don't think, but I might have done. And that was the point I was making about age. How old do you get when you can't quite remember whether you've seen a film or not? You've been told about it so often that possibly you have seen it. And do you get books and films mixed up? Does that ever happen to you? Sometimes I think I've seen something and I realise that I've read it. I'm blessed, I guess, with quite a good imagination when I'm reading a book, or a great fondness of escapism. Have I seen that film? No, I've read the book. It was never a film. Or it was never a book. You've seen the film, you thought you'd read that. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens occasionally. So I can't remember whether I've seen Minority Report or not, but I'm fairly sure that it involves computers predicting crimes. Using algorithms, they are able to identify the imminent commission of a serious crime, and Tom Cruise is able to get there to stop it from happening. Is that about right? Don't ring me. I think that's about right. That's the plot of Minority Report. You remember what I said a minute ago about fascism and how the word changes in meaning depending on where you are and the context that you're using? Rick Mayall uses it in The Young Ones as a comedy device. He calls everyone a fascist. As I mentioned earlier, you've probably thought of a traffic warden as a fascist. What about this phrase here? The Ministry of Justice. Think about that. It's an innocuous phrase, even a reassuring phrase in a safe, well-run democracy, right? The Ministry of Justice. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? As soon as possible, please, if that's all right with you. The Ministry of Justice. Now transfer it to an Orwellian dystopia. The Ministry of Justice is at the front door. It's weird, isn't it? Exactly the same words, completely different impact depending on where you are and who you are, and quite possibly when you are as well. I'm still fairly relaxed with the words Ministry of Justice in the United Kingdom, but as I've mentioned already, what if Suella Braverman was in charge of it? Justice for who? Pretty clear, to nod briefly back to the last hour, that justice in America is going to depend upon everything from ethnicity to professions of loyalty soon, if not already. The Ministry of Justice is working with researchers on a test project that uses algorithms, wait for it, to identify patterns in the personal data in an effort to improve public safety. So it aims, are you ready for this? To predict who may go on to commit serious violent crimes, including murder, by analysing data already held by police and probation services. I think it was The Guardian. No, it was a pressure group called State Watch that put in a Freedom of Information request and discovered that the project, originally called the Homicide Prediction Project, has since been renamed Sharing Data to Improve Risk Assessment. But that first paragraph there, a controversial system that aims to predict who may go on to commit serious violent crimes, including murder, by analysing data held by police and probation services, is being developed by the government. And I don't know whether or not this will come as a surprise to you, but I'm maybe not supremely comfortable with this, but I can't currently see what the problem is, except what if it fell into the wrong hands? But it's looking at things that predict the likelihood of you committing a murder. What do the wrong hands look like? So I'm not accepting answers that say they might lie, because that way you never do anything. Oh, people might lie. So you've got a technology that is being used for good things. You can make a valid argument that it might be used for bad things, but you can't do that here. The technology is going to be used to identify people most likely to go on to commit murders. There are risks, of course, that it will profile people using data relating to mental health, to self-harm or to domestic abuse. But again, I mean, what is the worst that can happen? Names, dates of birth, ethnicity, gender, police national computer identification numbers will all be on the list. But in terms of delivering evidence that you are likely, more likely, most likely to actually commit a very serious crime, Jake suggests it's just like a dating app, but instead of identifying a potential partner, it's identifying a potential murderer. I wish I'd thought of that. And as soon as I say I wish I'd thought of that, I say to myself, I wish I'd just pretended that I had and completely ignored the fact that Jake sent it in a text message to 848. Actually, it's a WhatsApp, that. So what do we think? A good old-fashioned phone-in this. Sometimes I need a little bit of a breather after going down the fascism route. This is a good old-fashioned phone-in. The authorities are going to start crunching data to identify people most likely to commit serious crimes. And that will allow them to intervene and presumably help. What is not to like? Can you imagine what would happen if, at some not too distant point in the future, it was proved that that a murder could have been prevented, that if this technology had actually been used by the government, then a murder could have been prevented because this culprit would have set every bell ringing, every alarm sounding. Look, I'm going to tell you the truth. Head and heart are often in conflict during our time together, aren't they? I think it's mad to pretend otherwise. We are all driven by both our intellect and our emotions, by our head and by our heart. So I'm not sure which way round it is on this one. Part of me really likes this idea. It would reduce the amount of misery, pain, heartbreak and horror in the world by identifying the people most likely to commit it and somehow nipping that potentiality in the bud. And there's another part of me that just has a sense I can't articulate that this is really bad and scary. The word dystopian appears in some of the newspaper headlines today. The front page of The Guardian, in fact, dystopian tool aims to predict murders. It's not dystopian. It's futuristic. But I don't think it's dystopian unless you can explain to me the vague misgivings that I have, the vague misgivings that you have. Maybe your misgivings are not vague. They're more profound. I'll tell you why this is not good news, James. ... Okay? Sharing data to improve risk assessment sounds fine. Homicide prediction project sounds a little bit different, and that perhaps is why they've changed the name. So would you want to live in... See, Francis says Minority Report technology is a great idea. What should we be scared of? What shouldn't we be scared? What do you like about this? And if I'm going to use myself as the lens through which we examine the story, in much the same way that Donald Trump is the lens through which you have to examine everything happening in America at the moment, why have I got a strong sense of approval with a fairly hefty side dish of reservation? What are the reservations? What's the worst? What are the misgivings based on? Because I think it's head that's saying good idea. I can articulate that. It's heart that's saying, are you sure? And I can't quite articulate that. That's why words like dystopian are unhelpful, because it's a net bad. Do we like dystopias? No, we don't. But put some flesh on those bones. What are we supposed to be scared of? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:19 is the time, and this cuts both ways. This is really interesting. So David says it's not good news when it sends you to El Salvador, and James makes the same point. Would this algorithm have sent immigrants to El Salvador? I think the answer would be no. They call it an administrative error. I know technology is not infallible, but what would you rather take your chances with? Somebody trying to keep Donald Trump sweet, or a computer that you can't argue with? Looking at algorithms and proof and criminal records. The bloke that is currently languishing in a Salvadoran jail has no black marks on his record. He is there entirely by mistake. And Donald Trump, because fascists can never admit that they're wrong, Donald Trump's administration is desperately trying to leave him there and resist all legal importuning to bring him back. And so I don't think that's the zinger you think it is, lads. I don't think he would be there now if it had been a decision taken by algorithms. I don't know. In fact, I don't know a great deal about this, but I know a man who does. Josh is in Brussels. Josh, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Josh.
I love you. There's a I love you butt coming.
There's a big butt. I like big butts, Josh. I cannot lie.
So basically, it's this. The problem here is, this is how I think I may have told you before, but I worked with the big boys, the Googles,
yes,
the guys who do all these algorithms, etc. So I work in the space of AI. Now, what I'm going to tell you is this: it's very simple. People get it very complicated, but it's not. If you have a set of data sets, so James O'Brien wants to go and buy a new pair of trousers, and he wants it to be a size 34 or whatever the leg is, etc.
That's very generous. That's very generous of you, Josh. Maybe once.
So basically, you have a set of parameters, okay, or what they're called in AI. You may have heard people say data sets. You have a set of parameters. You put them in, okay, into the computer, and then it spits out an output. So I'm going to really, really even make it more simple. bad data in equals bad data out. So if you have parameters which say we want to have this AI algorithm go and look for potential knife crimes in London, what do you think that who's going to be I mean, I'm black, as you know. Who are the people that are going to be targeted for that? What do you think is likely to happen with those data sets, the parameters that they put in?
So this is the idea that data, oddly, given that we think it isn't, is often biased.
Exactly, because the people who are putting that information into it are biased. So
bad data in, bad data out.
Correct. So another way to look at it is if you look, there's been recent reports, years ago now, on dating apps. For those people that use dating apps, you'll find that people of African women, people of African descent, and I believe it's Asian men, don't do very well on these dating sites. And then that's because it amplifies people's biases. So what happens is they're not seen as potential dating people. So there's information that people can Google on the internet about this that tells you that if you set the parameters up badly and you have bad data sets and you're looking for a specific outcome, the idea is it absolves you of any saying, well, it's the computer can't be racist.
Computer says no.
Can't be exactly.
Computer says no.
Exactly. It can't be sexist. It can't be homophobic. All of these things. So it's a way of absolving the responsibility.
So what would you be most worried about being included in the data set then?
I think it's what the parameters of that data set are.
Yes.
And what they're because obviously they've got an idea what they're looking for, right? So just say we're looking for murderers. What are the parameters that you're going to look for? What are you?
But I could reassure you, couldn't I?
How?
By telling you what the parameters are.
And what are those parameters, James?
I don't know. I'm speaking theoretically. I could reassure you by pointing out that the parameters don't do the things that we think they do. And listen, right. I think I know exactly where you're driving, and you know more about this than I do. But if there is I know it will never be a single factor that speaks to why some demographics are more likely to engage in certain crimes than others, whether it's elderly white broadcasters and paedophilia or young black men and knife crime. It's one factor that points to disproportionality, and it would never be the only one that they looked at. So they're not going to say every white radio broadcaster is likely to be the next Jimmy Savile any more than they're going to say, then a computer algorithm is going to say every young black lad is a potential gangster.
Right, but then what you have is you have the police then going around to pre-crimes, as you refer to Minority Report.
Yeah, pre-crimes. That's what it is,
so you're going around, it's like a thought police thing, so you're going around saying, I think there's a good chance that you're going to go and stab someone tomorrow. And the fact that you happen to be a young black guy in London, has got nothing to do with the fact that I'm deciding to arrest you to stop you from doing it. You see where I'm going with it?
Yeah, but it might be true. I know I'm kind of flirting with white privilege at this point. It's a bit like the stop and search conversation, which is where the if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear argument is at its most stupid and boneheaded. But I can conceive of circumstances that would assuage your concerns.
One more thing, okay?
Yeah, go on.
Let me give you. So when the information comes out, so the data out, and a particular group is targeted. And
but a particular group won't be targeted. A particular group will not be targeted. I dispute that conclusion.
How do you know?
Because it would not pass. It would not be.
But the evidence is already out there. There are books already been written by people who are already showing that some AI is biased. It's already out there. This isn't new. What you're saying here is the application of it.
Yeah, bad data in, bad data out. So you work very hard to make sure that you don't put bad data in.
And then what happens when somebody's wrongly arrested and they didn't have a thought crime?
But that happens now.
Oh, and then what's the recompense for that? How people?
That happens now.
Well, like the guy
and they're not going to arrest you for a pre-crime. They're going to intervene in the hope of putting you back on a even keel, back on the straight and narrow.
Based on an algorithm with no evidence.
Well, so there is an algorithm is evidence.
Where is the judiciary in this? Where is the oversight?
Well, you're talking as if I've come up with the idea, mate. I'm just telling you what's in the news.
I'm sorry. The reason I'm so passionate about it is because I see the effects of what it's doing already.
Yes.
So people will tell you already, like people who are applying for jobs, They'll fill in an online form, and it populates the fields, and then they get an email back 2 hours later, knowing full well nobody's even looked at it. They've just the algorithm has picked out certain words that are missing from the application and has no understanding of the wider context.
And it's gone the other way. So here is a researcher at State Watch who submitted the original Freedom of Information request. Time and again, research shows that algorithmic systems for predicting crime are inherently flawed. To which my slightly sort of half-hearted response is that doesn't mean they have to be. You can't derive an ought from an is. But she goes on to say that her name is Sophia Lyle. This latest model uses data from our institutionally racist police and Home Office. That's a matter of record. That's your point.
Yep.
Reinforced. And it will therefore code in bias towards racialized and low-income communities. And to which I don't think naively, but sincerely respond by saying, but it doesn't have to.
Yes, but you're ascribing the idea as being good in theory.
Yes.
But you're not the practical application. If it affected you, I mean, I know you have kids.
Yeah.
Imagine one of your kids is with a group of kids, and one of these kids is targeted by the AI as carrying a weapon, and then your daughter is swept up in it, or your son or whoever is swept up in that. You're going to be up in arms. Going to say, I don't like the idea of an algorithm deciding whether my daughter is arrested with somebody.
Tom in Manchester makes exactly the point. It's the same point. He says, how would you feel if you got a knock on the door saying your child has to go to a special school and therapy because they've been identified as being a high risk of being a murderer? Are we not at risk of creating self-fulfilling prophecies? This isn't quite your point, but it speaks to my parenthood. By telling people that they are at a higher risk of committing crimes, how long till universities or jobs turn people down because of these higher risks, these perceived higher risks. But these are, there's two conversations here, and you've highlighted it perfectly, better than I have. One is theoretical and one is practical. So
exactly. The
theoretical doesn't necessarily get thrown out with the bathwater of the practical, does it, or does it?
Well, not really. It's the application of. We have to make a decision in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yes.
I can see there's going to be legislation based upon what algorithms do and what these data sets are. So again, I come back to the whole idea. If you have data which is, let's just say, biased or not very good data, okay, and then and the outputs show that those people are being affected by it socially, you're then going to have to adjust it. So it becomes a whole catching up game. You're not ahead of the curve, you're behind the curve. Do you see what I mean?
Of course I do.
You're not in control of any of it. You're absolving responsibility and hoping that the algorithm.
But that's happening everywhere. That's happening everywhere, isn't it? I mean, get off your online shopping app, your banking app, your music app. We're being absolved of responsibility. Have you got children? I can't remember. I don't think you do.
No, I don't.
So you can't. I tell you, Josh, you can't recommend music to your children anymore because Spotify's beating you to it. It's all out there. We've been responsibility has been taken away from us in so many areas of life.
Yeah, but that's fine in those areas, but not when it comes to people's liberty. That's a completely different.
But this is about people on probation. I mean, specifically, the project is being conducted for research purposes only, according to the Ministry of Justice, or the Ministry of Justice. It's been designed using existing data held by HM Prison and Probation Services and police forces on convicted offenders to help us better understand the risk of people on probation going on to commit serious violence.
I have real deep ethical and philosophical concerns with it.
And moral.
Because this is, and moral. This is going. Once the genie is out of the bottle, you cannot put it back away. You can't. It's and this is what people keep missing. And I'm one of the people who's quite, I can say, outspoken about it.
Sure.
Amongst the people who develop.
Yes.
Yeah. So I particularly because I know the effects personally as someone who's black. I'm fortunate that I haven't come across anything like that. But the point I'm making really clear is I know, based on what my work and what I've seen, that these data, I've seen rubbish data sets based upon people's body size and height to work out whether all sorts of things.
But some data sets work. Otherwise, the technology wouldn't be moving at breakneck pace, would it? And that's where we part. That's where we part as friends. Yeah. And I look forward to your next call because I think we can theoretically and practically are two very, very different propositions, and the devil, as always, will lie in the detail. But, as Josh points out, you can't get the genie back in the bottle. Right, pop quiz. Which topic is the one in which I have recently concluded that you might actually be able to get the genie back in the bottle? Of all the conversations that we have together, let's just have a little test and see how many people hit the ping, hit the WhatsApp, or hit the text. There is one hugely relevant area of public discourse in which I think perhaps not only might it be possible to get the genie back in the bottle, but it might actually be important. No prizes, just the satisfaction of knowing that you're one of my most committed listeners, and as such should probably be committed. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Going to break a few hearts. It's not Brexit. Well, at least that's not what I was thinking of. The genie that could actually be got back into the bottle. But I've got a Brexit phone-in brewing. Partly as a consequence of the inimitable Phillips O'Brien, the professor at St Andrews University, some comments he's made recently about how you cope with a problem like Trump. But no, it's not Brexit, which a lot of you are, I think, offering up more in hope than expectation. And it's extraordinarily gratifying how many people got it right. It's that curious hinterland occupied by both social media and smartphones. I don't know if you can get smartphones back in the bottle as a genie style, but the ease of access and the absence of regulation and the absence of policing when it comes to teenagers using smartphones or being on social media in general, that is the genie that I think we may have to try to get back into the bottle. And the EU moved yesterday, by the way. I should bring you some more details of that story, actually, to bring in the first major sanction on social media platforms for exercising precisely zero duty of care. I've told you before, but I'll tell you again, that's what part of what the plan is when they start wanging on about freedom of speech over here being under threat when you can be locked up in the United States of America for looking at Donald Trump the wrong way. That is why they're doing it, in large part to protect themselves from duty of care of consumers, customers, your children. I've also been swatting up a little bit on that Daily Express journalist I told you about at the top of the hour, and it's even more interesting than I thought, but that's not what we're talking about at the moment. We're talking about the, quotes, dystopian or, quotes, chilling tool that can predict who will kill. Looking, and if I were to narrow it down after Josh's objections, all pertinent, all valid, it's looking at people on probation who have committed fairly serious crimes and identifying the ones most likely to go on to commit serious violence. That's all they're looking at the moment. What's not to like? Kieran's in Oxford. Kieran, what would you like to say?
Well, my concern on it is basically how does it find all this information? How is it recorded? You did say just now about probation, and I didn't hear about that.
No, that was me being very cheeky. If you were ringing in to object on grounds other than that, that's the first time I introduced it into the conversation with Josh at the end. So you can speak as if I hadn't done that, because I set the conversation up as a much broader, because it will be, won't it? I mean, you start off with people on probation. It works really well. Why don't we just algorithm everybody?
And under that assumption, but they just throw it on everyone, I would be affected by that because I have been arrested by the police back a decade ago for plans to kill people when I was under mental health problems.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I was sectioned under mental health, number 2 of the Mental Health Act,
right, after
a PTSD episode from when I was back in the army. And unfortunately, that's now on the record on the police's thing. Every time I call them up and they ask me my name, they ask me, are you from this incident back in 2013?
And that flags up.
Yeah. If that flags up on their system, the AI might see that and go, oh, no, he's going to murder someone. And there's bound to be other people in the situation that I'm in that have been just arrested for something, but not actually charged.
And that I mean, that's already there.
Yeah.
I don't know that the new technology offers up any new, because anybody looking at that is not going to say, no algorithm is going to say that makes you more likely to commit a serious crime in the future. Yeah. And it's already happening
that's
to you.
My concern on that.
It's a valid concern. It's a very personal concern and a very pertinent concern. And I don't know that I'm qualified to tell you not to worry.
No.
But don't worry.
And I understand why the police have put that on their system. I mean, after all, I was not in a great place, and
sure.
I was a threat to the public.
Yes.
But I never committed a crime. I never affected anyone. I needed the assistance, and unfortunately, the assistance wasn't available because I didn't have a bed. Right. So they had to arrest me to protect everyone else. Yes. And though I wasn't charged, though I'm not
and you don't want that,
anyway.
You don't want that to come back and haunt you. So, I mean, the words of comfort I offer you are they're only looking at people on probation who've already committed crimes, so you've got nothing to worry about. But you immediately come back to me and say, for now, James, for now.
Yeah.
Where does it go next? And I can say it must never go anywhere near you, but that's not worth the paper that it's printed on. How are you doing? Are you doing all right now?
Oh, much better.
Yeah,
I mean, the problem was when I was during that time, I kind of downplayed my illness, and it got to a point where it needed professional help. And now I know what I struggle with, and I dealt with it. But the problem is that. Like I said, there are people out there that have been arrested, have been charged with, well, they haven't been charged of anything, but they're known by the police for things that they've been arrested for. And the question is, will they be flagged up? Because you can be arrested.
And I'll tell you also, what about ex-military? There's probably some statistical, certainly a statistical likelihood of suffering more from PTSD or having problems brought on by some of the experiences you had during your service. And the idea that would flag you up as a potential risk feels profoundly wrong, doesn't it? I think we lost Kieran there. Well, it does to me, at least. Good call, Kieran. I hope you can still hear me. 11:41 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Quite a few people telling me that we kind of have the human equivalent of this in place already. Jennifer was a probation officer for 32 years. She says, we do this already. Police and probation do this already, but with the risk of human error. This should eliminate the risk. 32 years of probation officer. I have examples of information being missed and people dying as a result. And Junan is the person I've been relying on for comments like bad data in, bad data out. So I probably should have credited that earlier. Junan writes, as long as the data is free from bias, then it would be fine. Most data, however, is not. It's when my naivety kicks in and I say, well, it doesn't mean it would always be bad. And Dave in Biggin Hill says, we used to sit for hours going through cards with photos on, checking criminal records, numerous databases. We do it manually and it involved lots of coffee. Perhaps this is a bit hysterical. And it was David that pointed out our shopping apps, our banking apps, our music apps already deploy variations or versions of this technology, and we tend not to get completely spooked by them. Matt's in East Finchley. Matt, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. I think you've just said a lot of what I was going to say about how it's used already.
Right.
But,
sorry.
I was going to have a crack at about why it's a bad idea, even though I actually think it's got a lot of merit if used well.
Yes.
So, sorry, I'm just going to cough. Sorry, excuse me.
That's quite all right. Have you not got a button? I've got a button.
No, well, I mean, I can mute my phone. But
no, I've got a button here. Literally, I've got a button that says cough on it. Have you not got one? I thought everyone had one of those when they come on the show. Do you not have one?
Mine's broken.
Shall I show you? Do you want to hear it?
Yeah,
I'm going to cough now. Right, I'm going to press the button halfway through a cough. I don't think we've ever done this before, and I just cough that way so that I don't cover Sheila's. That was close. Sheila's microphone muff in unpleasant germs. Ready for this? Did that work? I'll do a longer one. There. Did it work? I did press it. I think I've pressed dim. I pressed dim by accident, which is appropriate. What does that do, Keith? Is that bad? All right, I'm going to try again on the cough button. Right, ready? Am I fading? Am I going dim? Right, it's amazing radio, this. I bet you're proud to be part of it, aren't you, Matt? Wait there, I'm going to do it again. Ready? There, did it work?
I heard you cough.
Does he hear that? Does it work on Matt? The button? It probably doesn't, does it? He'll hear me. Yeah, but he'll just hit. Oh, okay. Carry on, Matt. Can you remember why you rang in? Stop coughing. It's disgusting. It's a disgusting habit.
So I think that in order to use it effectively, I think I agree with everything that was said. I agree with the guy who was talking about how data sets probably have institutional bias in them. We need to be really careful about that. Yes. But I think in using it as well, there's probably going to have to be some education for courts for people who use it.
Well, what they're not telling us is what they're going to do with the information. You know, if they're going to keep you locked up for longer, then obviously we've all got a bit of a problem with it because you haven't done anything.
If they use it in trial, I mean, funnily enough, when you were talking about this, I started thinking about that famous case from 1968 where they used statistics to effectively convict a couple, People versus Collins, I think it was, because they based it on statistics, certain characteristics, a black man and a blonde woman at that time. I think they reasoned that there's only about it was 1 in 12 million chance that it wasn't them or something, but it was a complete misuse of statistics and a complete misuse of looking at the data.
And it's weird, isn't it? So the biggest worry about the technology could be the humans that use it, rather than the technology itself.
And the more complex it is, the more opaque it is. But I don't know how ChatGPT works. So the more sophisticated the model, and it pumps out a thing at the end. Do people understand, or is it so complex now? There's just vast opacity in how the judgment has been made.
Yeah.
We can all challenge stuff like, there was blood stains on the floor. Oh, I understand that. He was found with a knife in his hand. Oh, I understand that. I don't really understand, 14 trillion pieces of data were put through and it came out of this.
We had quite a good example earlier on the distilling down the hallmarks of fascism. And I think that the caller had kind of, he said he'd used AI, but what the AI had done is take a lot of lists that I've seen over the years, including Umberto Eco's, but there's loads of others as well, and distilled them down to 4. So it can do things like that. But yeah, I don't know how it works either, except it sort of reads everything and then crunches it. I don't think I'm going to get a PhD for that description. So all the worries are theoretical. Well, I beg your pardon, all the worries are about the possible practical applications. The principle is not objected to. So far, there's 10 minutes left on this topic. We've got another one for the next hour. The principle is not objected to. And particularly when you zone in on the target area, people on probation, then I know you heard me cough, Dale. The point was I pressed the button halfway through my cough, so you heard a bit of it and then you didn't hear the other bit. Unbelievable. I don't know what the dim button does, though. I've got a horrible feeling we might find out shortly. That principle of looking at the likelihood of reoffending doesn't seem to me, the more we talk about it, to actually be that new. And no, Carl, I don't have a button for those sort of bodily functions. I just cross my fingers, really, or my legs.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49 is the time. Apparently, the last time I pressed the dim button, Suella Braverman ended up doing my holiday cover. That's a warning to us all. How worried should we be? We're told it's dystopian. We're told that it's chilling. I've got a missing word round for you. Should I do that now as well? Do you want this? This is quite a good one. Farmer's luck in as wedding ring found in blank. Farmer's luck in as wedding ring found in blank. See if you get on. And I don't know if you listen to Dean Dunham's show on LBC on Saturday evenings, but he also answers legal questions in the Daily Mail, and one caught my eye today. I read it so you don't have to, all right? This one, I'm going to urge Dean to do this as a topic on his show on Saturday evening. I can see my neighbour sunbathing naked in his back garden. Is he breaking the law? Dean Dunham there, veering dangerously into Mystery Hour territory, I think. Never mind legal matters. This is the sort of legal questions that the Money Mail section of. He does he's a consumer lawyer, so it's a legal matter. But he's our consumer expert, Daniel Barnett, of course, doing the more specific legal things. But either way, I want Dean to come on and do the. I can see my neighbour sunbathing naked in his back garden. Is he breaking the law? Back to AI and the question of whether or not there's something fundamentally wrong, as in first principles, with the idea of using existing data held by His Majesty's Prison and Probation Services and police forces on specific convicted offenders to help a decision be made on the likelihood of somebody on probation going on to commit serious violence. Peter is in Nottingham. Peter, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Yeah.
Hello,
well, firstly, I'd like to apologise. I've got COVID, so if I cough, I don't have a dimming button, but I'll do my best not to.
Yes, thank you. You poor thing. Is it bad? What sort of dose is it? How are you getting on?
It's my third time with COVID. I've had 5 shots. And so, you know,
so it's hopefully much milder than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, it's like a heavy cold, but I am sort of semi-quarantining as my son's off from school.
Fair enough. But, thanks for the heads up. Go on.
What I wanted to say was that, you know, it's related to the conversation you were having earlier about Trump, and that is that Trump didn't just appear one day. It's not like he appeared on the American political scene and suddenly everyone was like, ooh, fascism, lovely. You know, the fact is that for people like Trump to exist, there's a lot of groundwork and a lot of fertile soil that needs to be created for, you know, a fascist overtake of a country. You know, you can look at the decades of news media from some of the players out in America and, you know, the establishment of ICE, the quote-unquote overfunding of the police forces out there. And this is sort of our own little sort of gateway into British fascism. And the reason why I say that is because, you know, it's, as you said, for fascism, it's a very strong obsession with crime and punishment. You know, we're offloading what is a very human thing, dealing with, you know, people who've broken the law and its impact on communities. We're outsourcing it to AI. Now, I work with AI. I even have my own offline version of DeepSeek running on a computer so I can tinker with it.
Okay.
And AI is like a very enthusiastic intern. You know, it'll belt out data sets very quickly as if its promotion depended on it. But you always need someone there to sanity check the output because, you know, mistakes are just as life. I mean, reportedly, Donald Trump's tariff plan was made by AI, they're now saying in the news. And what an absolute disaster that ignores real-world consequence. You know, all very good on paper, real-world execution, shocking.
But that's true of everything. That's true of everything. That's true of motor cars. You know, if we were focusing upon the damage that motor cars can do in the wrong hands, we never would have let them proliferate.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right.
Am I? I wondered halfway through that comment whether I was or not. To be honest with you, thank you.
Well, I mean, this is something that's distinctly different. You know, this involves the personal liberties of people. This involves people who may have committed crimes in the past and hopefully who have gone on to be reformed. And I think that one thing that we're ignoring is that if we were really concerned about recidivism in the UK justice system, there is already decades of evidence that we can remodel our system on to lower that. I mean, if you look at Scandinavian countries, they've got decades of evidence that the way in which they do rehabilitation leads to the lowest recidivism rates in the world. This
is very true.
But instead of taking a very, you know, thoughtful, admittedly slow, admittedly sort of reformist pathway to making our communities safer and reducing crime, we're taking it. This feels very authoritarian.
Okay, I hear you. Know? Yeah, no, I understand your point now, and I think you've diffused the point I was going to make, and I touched on about saying you can't dismiss everything on the grounds that it might be good in your hands, but it would be bad if it fell into someone else's. This is about direction of traffic, really, isn't it? Rather than specific applications. I'm not as worried about it as you are, but you know a lot more about AI than I do. Which might
yeah, unfortunately, I think nowadays a lot of corporations are, like the one I work for, are forcing us to really get into bed with AI, and you know, so everyone's having to become an expert on just how. I don't know.
It's not necessarily a negative. I mean, a pure negative. It can't be. But yes, you're right. So it is as Alan's just texted. It's all about guardrails. And until there aren't any, at which point everyone regrets the direction that they've gone in previously. Thank you, Peter. I hope you feel better soon. 11:56 is the time. Seb is in Ealing. Seb, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
I love the show, by the way.
That's very kind.
I'm a criminal barrister, and I obviously work in the criminal justice system and deal with pre-sentence reports, which probation workers write. And as you've already heard, they currently have all these tools that they call risk assessment. I can't remember what they're called now, but they're for assessing risk using basically algorithms. And at the moment, the writer of the report will say, I chucked all this information in about this person, and it says they're a high risk of committing a serious crime.
Right.
the writer.
So
then
that happens already.
That
happens already.
It does, although I don't think they necessarily use like complicated algorithms,
Sure.
but they definitely use these models, right?
Yes.
And the human being who is writing the report gets to say, I agree with that, this person does seem like a risk, or not. But the point that strikes me is that even if you have this amazing AI model that can predict who's a murderer or not, it still has to go in front of a human being somewhere along the line. You know, it's the judge who passes a sentence on a person, and the judge gets to decide. They could disagree, right? They could say, well, the model says this, but from what I've heard about them, I don't think they are a risk of this, that, or the other. So, like, when you've got a judge making a decision, you've also got people like me who get to scour in and say, this is what I think this person's risk profile is. So, yeah, we kind of already do it.
So you're punishing people who haven't done anything wrong, effectively. You're just on the grounds that they might. And that would involve whether or not you get bail, most obviously, or whether or not you might be a flight risk.
Yep, totally bail. But there's also these things called risk orders that we have now, James, where you can go to magistrates' courts and say, this person seems to be a risk of committing this sort of crime. We want this order, even though they've never committed a crime. So it is, in that word, pre-crime.
Yeah.
And they could say, we think this order should prohibit them from, I don't know, leaving the country, doing certain things. We already have these things in place at the moment. My worry is if you start bringing in algorithms that predict if somebody's going to commit a crime as serious as murder, what pre-crime orders are you going to get against that person? It all just seems to me either it's not been fully thought through.
Well, they're not presenting it. To be fair, and it's a result of a Freedom of Information inquiry. You can't expect the press office to have got all of its ducks in a row any more than I have on the question of applications and complications. But I think at the end of the hour, I understand better the misgivings that I had at the beginning than I do the enthusiasms. And do you know what we always forget? Or not always, but almost all dystopian fiction is science fiction, isn't it? And the technology is, I mean, I know that 1984 was written in the 1940s, but the things like the televisions that can see into your house, and the technology always plays a role in authoritarian dystopia. And that alone might be a reason to be wary.
Yeah.
Giving that idea. No, are you in court today?
Yeah, I'm just heading over to glorious Basildon, Bas Vegas. So yeah,
basically LA law, but in Essex. You take care, Seth. Thank you very much. It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'll give you the answer to this shortly. Farmer's luck in as wedding ring found in blank. How many do I get wrong? How many times do I come back to it and accidentally give away the answer? I've got it right today. I haven't given away the answer yet today. A couple of you have got it, but I never know whether you're cheating or not. In the next hour, I think we stay with matters rural. Farmers, that's rural, right? I'd look at the number of people who, quite possibly during lockdown, moved to the countryside or the seaside and have regretted it and moved back. I quite like the idea of what's wrong with the countryside, or perhaps the seaside. Oh, why not both?
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 is the time. Thank you to everybody who has reminded me of the late, great Dave Allen's contribution to the conversation about whether or not you should be allowed legally to sunbathe naked in your back garden. His observation was, very much of its era, I think, of its age. He used to say, shall I do the accent? No, I won't do the accent. If I look out of my window and I see my female neighbour sunbathing naked, I get arrested for being a peeping Tom. If she looks out of the window and sees me sunbathing naked, I get arrested for indecent exposure. It's a very good Dave Allen gag, Richard and Kimber and others bringing it to my attention. Once you've got something in your bonds, you can't get it out again. Do you find that? I can see my neighbour sunbathing naked in his back garden. Is he breaking the law? You'll have to read Dean Dunham's column in the Daily Mail today to get an answer to that question. I may throw open the phone line. Should we do a little early mystery hour? I think Natalie in Blackheath already wants to contribute. I guess it's about how offensive it is and where your garden is. Anyway, we may do that. If you think you've got an interesting contribution to make to this question, I can see my neighbour sunbathing naked in his back garden. Is he breaking the law? We used to have a neighbour sunbathing naked in the back garden, and my wife got really cross about her doing that. But I was on the fence. No, that's awful. That's such a bad joke. I'm here all week Try the veal. Yeah, right, I may do that. But the one I really want to do is this. Escape from the country. Buyers ditch coastal and rural living to return to cities. So the numbers are quite varied, actually. The proportion of people who say they rushed their decision to move during COVID and now regret it stands at 12%. Perhaps more interestingly, the proportion of people living in London who are now looking to stay has gone up. It got as low as 47% during COVID, and it's up to 58% now. Nobody tell the Americans, whatever you do, 58% of Londoners very, very keen to stay in London. That's despite all the no-go zones and all the getting arrested just for thinking and whatever else it is. There's a column in The Sun the other day, which even by the standards of Sun columns was an absolute study in stupidity. Someone claiming that they'd been touring around America and all anybody was talking about in Donald Trump's America was the infringements upon the liberties and the freedoms back here in Britain, as if the entire world is a racist blue tick on Elon Musk's sewer. So I like that. I can't imagine living anywhere else. The only time I have imagined living anywhere else was in fact during lockdown. I told you, didn't I? I missed the sky. I know it sounds a little bit romantic, but you'll indulge me. The big sky. I only clocked it. I only used those phrases. And funnily enough, the company that makes the Mystery Hour board game is called Big Sky, but I didn't know that at the time. And it was, I spend a lot of time in Norfolk if I can, not as much as I used to because the kids are growing up, but the sky in some parts of the world is just huge. I was in a terraced house in West London during lockdown, and I had a garden, which I appreciate was a privilege, but it's not huge, big shed at the bottom of it, so we could kind of escape. But the things that got on top of you were things that don't normally get on top of you because you're not normally confined to barracks. Felt oddly invasive to look out of your back bedroom window and see next door sitting on their patio. It just, you never felt alone, and in a good way. Not lonely, but alone, being alone, having a little bit of time. And for me, the big sky, the sense of endless possibilities, the reminder of how insignificant we are in the great scheme of things, the ability to just lose yourself in nature. I missed it so much. We've never really done a phone-in about how lockdown changed us, and if we have, it would have mostly focused on negatives, but for me that would have been a positive. For me it would have been a real reminder of something, or becoming conscious of something that had previously lurked in my subconscious. Most obviously, the importance of communing with nature. Have we got some breaking news about China imposing tariffs on the United States of America of 84%? It's getting a little bit silly now. So tariffs on US imports of Chinese goods hit 104% at midnight last night. China has now responded by putting tariffs of 84% on US goods. I mean, what happens? And what do you do with a madman? Do you try and out-mad him? Or do you try and appease him? We've had that conversation several times, but I think that counts as breaking news, more perhaps on that this hour. But I want to draw your attention next to what is wrong with the countryside. And, you know, I'm going to abandon my traditional habit of trying too hard to be nice. You can be as vicious as you want. Mark's already been in touch. He says, I moved from the fine city of Norwich to the Cotswolds. Honestly, James, I've never met so many vacuous, entitled idiots in my life. That's Mark who said that. Just in case, I don't want to end up on the front page of the Cirencester Gazette or whatever it might be in that neck of the woods. That's Mark's view. I haven't spent enough time I grew up in Kidderminster, which is definitely not the countryside. It's neither countryside nor suburb. It's a sort of dwindling town. One of those post-industrial towns that used to have a massive industry, in our case carpets, and has never really had anything replace it, which didn't matter in the 1970s and the 1980s when I was young. There was still an air of prosperity in town, even in the sort of concrete hellscape that it had been turned into by successive council decisions. But it wasn't until more recently that it began to feel like a place with its heart hollowed out. But that's not relevant. This is about people who have moved to coastal and rural areas and really regretted it. And I want you to tell me why. A friend of mine couldn't believe the casual racism, and he's a white guy, but he couldn't believe the casual racism, the sort of Farage fan club that would gather at the school gates when he was picking up his little girls. And he'd always associated it, as a dyed-in-the-wool Londoner and a lifelong LBC listener, he'd always associated those attitudes with much older people. He couldn't believe that these sort of Daily Mail, Nigel Farage talking points were being parroted without challenge or without any embarrassment at all at the school gates, just about an hour and a half outside London. I won't tell you in which, well, right, it was Oxfordshire. And he found that shocking. The people that had always lived there and the people who hadn't were like two very distinct tribes, defined and divided largely by attitude, not exclusively. Of course, there are plenty of people who live in London who are racist bigots, and there are plenty of people who've never been to London in their life who aren't. But he found it so unpleasant, and bullying in school for being an outsider of one of his children, that he moved back again. And he honestly, I remember when he left, it was like a great send-off. It was like when Chitty Chitty Bang Bang took off. It was banners in the street and party poppers all over the place. But he hated it. Very, very different. So just tell me if you've managed to, and you can come at it from the other angle as well. You can say this is just snobbery, James. This is anti-English snobbery. The true heart of England lies in the countryside. But what's the difference in life between these two locales? Living in the city, most obviously London, but of course there are other cities are available. You wouldn't want to live in Birmingham at the moment. I don't know if you heard Tom Swarbrick's broadcast from Rat Central earlier this week, but Birmingham's got a whole heap of problems going on. But I have only ever really lived in a city since I was 18. I moved to Manchester when I was 18, and I moved from Manchester to London. I don't know. I can't remember what it's like. I just remember being bored a lot as a teenager. I told you there was a bus at the end of the lane where I lived that went to Bridgnorth once a fortnight. Otherwise, you had to walk into town or catch a bicycle. Catch a bicycle? No, you had to cycle into town or catch a bus once a fortnight. Some of the buses would go into Kiddie occasionally, but they didn't come near our house. That is half of this phone-in. Possibly a third if we decide to do the naked sunbathing. But half of this phone-in is the difference between city and country living. What are the biggest differences for you as someone who has done both? Because I know you're thinking it's a silly question because it's obvious, but it's not obvious to anyone who hasn't done both. But the second bit of the question is potentially the more interesting one, the more exciting one. Why do you want to move back? Why did you move back? What was it about moving to the country when you were a little bit high on COVID fumes, a little bit high on lockdown? A bit like I sounded when I started wanging on about big skies a moment ago. So you decided to up sticks, move the whole family, take them to the seaside or take them to the countryside or take them to somewhere in between both of them. And you realised, I don't know, slowly, quickly, somewhere in betweenly, that this wasn't actually for you at all. I think it's a bit like those drinks you have on holiday. Just bear with me on this one. I think it works. So you have a drink on holiday, right? For example, limoncello or the banana liqueur that they serve up in the Canary Islands. And you're sitting on the terrace and the restaurateur, mine host, comes out and brings you a free little shot glass of a limoncello or perhaps a schnapps. I hesitate to put ouzo in this category because I think ouzo is a drink for all seasons as a Hellenophile. But the banana liqueur in the Canary Islands is, well, you know where I'm going with this. So you're sitting there on the terrace and the restaurateur brings it out, gives you a glass and you sip it and you say to your wife or your boyfriend or your partner or your mate, this is delicious. I'm going to get a bottle of this. I'm going to take it home. This is absolutely delicious. I can't believe I've never had this before. I went to the Canary Islands 15 years ago and I've still got the bottle of banana liqueur in the back of a cupboard somewhere because when you drink it at home, for reasons that science is unable to explain, when you drink it at home, it's gross. It's absolutely gross. It tastes like kind of gone off Nesquik powder or something like that. In Gran Canaria, magnificent, absolutely delicious. Back home in West London, absolutely gross. And I think that this is the same thing but with houses, right? So you're on holiday or you visit the countryside for a fortnight or a week and you think, oh, this is amazing. Look at the skies. This is great. We should move here. And then during lockdown, everyone goes a bit stir crazy. And you think, well, why don't we do it? It kind of gave people bit of confidence lockdown. You said, well, look, the world, I'll tell you what it did. It broke normal. So where once you would have gone, no, we can't do that. Don't be ridiculous. It broke normality. We can't do that. That's too far-fetched. That's too outlandish. So it taught us that we didn't have to go into work. We could work from home. Once you've established that you can work from home, you don't have to be where you currently are. And then you can really start addressing the massive questions like, well, why don't we just move to the countryside? Why don't we move to the seaside? I can see how it happened. Everyone gets caught up in it. Kids love you can go surfing every day after school, Keith. It's going to be magnificent. I don't know why I cast Keith in the role of my teenage son there, but it worked, didn't it? You go surfing every day after school, Keith. It's going to be great. The dog's going to love it. Everyone's going to... Then you get there, and what happened? 0345 6060 973. What happened to make you wish that you hadn't made the move in the first place? Or, because you know how open-minded this programme is, or... tell me what was the best thing that you ever did. So there's 2 or 3 ways into this. No reason not to get involved if you are in this category of humans. What's the difference for you between living in a city and not living in and living in the countryside? 0345 6060 973. And why do you regret it? Or absolutely relish the decision? What is it that has made you think of your house as the architectural equivalent of a Canarian banana liqueur? 0345 6060 973. One of the most delicious things imaginable in little tiny doses once a year or so. But as a permanent way of living, or as the only drink you're ever allowed, not on your Nelly. Hit the numbers now. You will get through, okay? And you're right, actually, Richard in Sheffield. Perhaps the limoncello banana liqueur question is a mystery hour issue. There could be something in that, but that's not what we're doing today. We are doing the question of, why do you regret moving to the countryside, moving out of town? Why do you regret moving out of the city? And don't worry about being rude, because I suspect the main answer is going to be either the people or the isolation. 12:17 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 20 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question of why you hate the countryside is a slightly simplistic distillation of what we're actually asking. It is, in a way, about why you regret moving. Or don't, of course. I'll take those calls as well. But looking at the numbers, we kind of predicted this, probably because of my mate's experience. And on the question of casual racism, which an awful lot of you are bringing up, I mean, if you're white and you're staggered by the casual racism that you're coming across in the countryside, outside big cities. Imagine what it would be like if you were from an ethnic minority. But this is what people like Farage mean when they call you out of touch or metropolitan liberal elite. It means you're not used to people being pretty violently racist on a regular basis, as if that's a bad thing. These people are out of touch. They don't live in the real world. They're metropolitan liberal elite. They've got no idea what it's like out there. And of course, for some people, but not all, what it's like out there is that when you make a comment that is reminiscent of Bernard Manning in his pomp, you're not drummed out of polite society. And that is absolutely shocking. I remember being at a wedding in Worcestershire, and the bloke next to me decided that he was going to tell me about the Jews. I mean, as cool as you like, a black country, wealthy black country industrialist at a wedding in Worcestershire just says, let me tell you about the Jews. And I thought, whoa, I don't think this would happen in a similar scenario in London. Even if people were holding those thoughts, they wouldn't be so completely comfortable and confident that they would just wade into the conversation. And I can't quite remember how I closed him down. And he literally looked away, buttered his bread roll and turned back to me and went, all right then, let me tell you about the Chinese. And I wasn't with Mrs. O'Brien. Well, I was with Mrs. O'Brien, but I was with Mrs. O'Brien Senior. It was one of the first things we'd gone to after my dad passed away. So I was very conscious of my mum's equilibrium and how well my mum was. And I said to him, it's such a shame that you couldn't meet my wife. My mum's +1 for this. It's such a shame you couldn't meet my wife. I said, she's a Chinese Jew. And my mum's sitting on the other side of him. And she nearly spluttered her bread roll all over the table. And the fella didn't know what to do with himself. There's two things going on there. Casual anti-Semitism and casual racism directed at Chinese people. Because he did go a little further. He was talking to me about greed and about all that kind of thing and why you can't do business with these people. I don't think that I've ever been in circumstances in town where that would be unnoted. And yet in that context, in that space, it was absolutely unremarkable. And that's what they mean by metropolitan liberal elite, in that you're shocked by people being massive racists. So, down with that sort of thing. 23 after 12 is the time. Juliet is in Marlow. Juliet, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well indeed. What's on your mind?
Good. Well, we made the move out. We're not actually in Marlow town. It's the closest place for me to be able to give a geographical reference to where I live. We're about 4 miles outside in the rolling Chilterns.
Very nice.
Really beautiful.
Bit boring,
made the move from West London, from Chiswick, which you know very well.
I didn't think anyone ever left Chiswick. I thought it was like the Hotel California. You could check out any time you like, but you could never leave.
Well, it's funny you say that, because my parents-in-law still live there and my sister-in-law still live there. So we are frequent visitors back. But at the time, it was 8 years ago, and my children were 5 and 8. And we lived very centrally, just 2 streets behind the high road, which was brilliantly located for me, having...
There's a cinema now.
I know.
Wasn't there then, was it? Look at you silly sausage. You could have had a cinema on your doorstep.
We've got one in Marlow now.
Yeah, it's miles away, though. Couldn't walk there.
No, exactly. And that's one of my points, is that we made the move because at the time we couldn't afford to upsize our family home, which we desperately needed because the kids were getting bigger and our house was very small.
What are the biggest differences? Well, apart from walking, what are the biggest negatives? And then you can, because I've got a horrible feeling, and I would never dream of describing you thusly, Juliet. But I don't think people are going to ring me to slag off their new neighbours. I think we're just going to get a load of people ringing in, sounding ever so slightly smug, describing how little they regret the move and how wonderful their new life in the countryside is.
I could go down that vein, but I'm not going to.
No,
so I'll give you the negative.
Yes,
so,
thank you. It's a phone-in radio, for God's sake. All we want is negatives.
I know. Okay, I'll give you the negative. So we're very blessed with the house we're in. We've got a lovely massive garden. We're on a National Trust estate, so we've got access to loads of walks, and it's brilliant.
But these are not negatives.
I'm leading into the
Go on then.
I recently broke my hand and I couldn't drive for about 5 weeks. We have no bus service from where we live. And without me being able to drive, I can't go anywhere apart from walking the dog. So the kids can't get to school. I can't get to the shops. I can't walk to a shop. Now, that was our choice for where we live, but it's part and parcel of proper country living. So my husband had to work from home. He had to ferry the kids to school. He had to do all the shopping and all the other bits and pieces. And then it does become very, very isolating. And I found that in lockdown as well. So as blessed as we were to have this beautiful countryside to walk around, not being able to see someone walk past our house, to be completely isolated is actually it's really badly affected.
So it's real grass is greener syndrome, because I thought it was a nightmare to be, cheek by jowl with people, but actually there's comfort in company just as much. Well, we need both. We need company and we need isolation sometimes.
Massively, and sometimes I have too much isolation, and that is a negative, and that's when I really do miss the...
So if I could give you a massive house in Bedford Park... Mm-hmm. Would you move back?
If you took away the aeroplanes flying overhead...
Oh, come off it. Everyone gets used to that.
No, I know, but give me Bedford Park house with the garden my size, but you'll never find it.
Get a big enough garden in Bedford Park. I'll give you... Nick Clegg's just moved there. I'll give you his house.
Okay.
You can have Nick Clegg's house just on that bit by Turnham Green. You know those massive houses? I'll give you one of those. You'd be back in a heartbeat.
Well, I don't know if I would because of the air.
Oh, that's a shame. That's a shame because I've got the keys here.
Okay, I'll take it.
It's 12:27. Thank you, Julia. And she succeeded in not sounding remotely smug, which I am conscious of other callers possibly not succeeding in. I know I pretended that I wanted to hear from people who didn't regret it, but I really want to hear from people who hate it. I moved to the countryside. It's bloody awful. The people, the weather, flipping animals everywhere. Oh, I should give you the answer to that question, shouldn't I? Just gave you a clue. Farmer's luck in as wedding ring found in... Ready? Cow. Wedding ring found in cow. Not cow pat, but cow. 4 months after losing the ring, Mr. Brandhuber, he's a German farmer, by the way, Johannes Brandhuber, recently married. He's from Lower Bavaria, if you're interested. Lost his ring while tending to his livestock. Absolutely gutted. Didn't realise. It came off his finger. And then 4 months later, I'm going to warn you now, this isn't for vegetarians. All right? 4 months later, he got a phone call off his butcher. Not the bloke he buys his sausages off, but the bloke he delivers his cows to. So he got a phone call off his butcher who said that one of his workers had found something unexpected in the stomach of the cow, which was called Herzl, in the interests of full disclosure. I've never been a fan of naming animals that you're intending to eat. I've always thought that that's the distinction. If you give it... We once found some massive snails in our back garden, and I thought I'll fry those up with some garlic butter. And then I made the mistake of calling one of them Snaily when my children were young, and I couldn't eat Snaily. I could have eaten an unnamed random snail that I'd found in my back garden, but once we'd called it Snaily, we couldn't eat the thing. It was quite bizarre. But they called it Herzl, sent it to the abattoir, get a phone call from the butcher. They've only found his ring inside Herzl's stomach. What's factually wrong about that sentence there? The Daily Telegraph has reported that they have... that's one for mystery. How can you eat snails that you find in your garden? I presume they were big. I'm telling you, they were massive. What's wrong with that story? What's biologically wrong or anatomically wrong with the way the Daily Telegraph has written this story? They said the butcher revealed that one of his workers had found it inside Herzl the cow's stomach. Answers on a postcard, please. I could be wrong. It's not my strong suit, but I think there's something anatomically questionable about the way that story has been written up. But the answer to the mystery, the missing word round, farmer's luck in as wedding ring found in cow. And then they add, the sub-editor quite cleverly adds in brackets, who's not so lucky. What, by dint of being dead and everything. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here is Amelia Cox with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So I was about to give us all a gold star for being so clever, because, of course, cows have more than one stomach. So the article in the Daily Telegraph today describing a wedding ring being found inside a cow's stomach, I thought was wrong. But then I saw Ellis's message, who says, nope, as if he'd read my mind, and yours, loads of messages to that. Nope, one stomach, 4 compartments. So maybe, I don't know, maybe my pedantry has been misplaced, often the way with pedantry. 12:33 is the time. Back to the question of why you regret moving to the countryside. Or, I suppose, why you don't. Jane's in Ashford. Jane, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, Brian.
Hello,
James,
John.
sorry.
No, that's all right, Bob.
A good start. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous.
That's only me. It's only me. Brian works. Do you know that when I was a gossip columnist and I wanted to get information out of people without necessarily giving them my real name, I would occasionally call myself Brian James.
Ah.
So that works.
Very useful.
Yeah, very useful.
Very useful. Yeah. So I moved out of London after a lifetime there. You know, I was born in London and lived there for 46 years. But my husband and I decided to move out to be near his parents, etc., young children at that time. So it seemed like a good idea. But I think... I remember experiencing a level of grief having left London. Really? I can't. Yeah, seriously. I think I sort of broke down one evening and described it as such. I can't really explain it, but you're on. It's like you're on a different kind of battery. You know,
don't
when
know
I go back into
what
London,
you've missed.
I key in.
Yes, it's Joni Mitchell territory. You don't know what you've got till it's gone because it's just normal when you're here.
Absolutely.
Not just London. I'm talking about all
cynical.
cities. I want to make it clear. This also applies to every city under the sun. I think the next caller is a Geordie from Newcastle. So it is just a different speed of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everything is so different. You know, even in the winter now, I probably get more the SAD kind of syndrome because literally from my house, there is no light outside, and what's beautiful to me is looking out of, maybe a higher flat in London and seeing all the lights and knowing that the whole
part of the
whole
buzz.
world is out there.
It's horses for courses a bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because some people will prefer one and some people will prefer the other. But the people who've made the move, I like my analogy with the banana liqueur, Jane. I think that things that feel lovely on holiday don't always feel lovely when it becomes the new permanent, the new normal.
Yeah. We were regular weekend visitors, and I probably should have realised that after walking the high street and maybe popping into Woolies for my entertainment as it was then, that probably wouldn't sustain me.
Would you come back if you could?
I would, and I've been banging on to friends,
really?
ad infinitum that I am coming back. But the thing is, you get trapped
Property
by your
prices.
Children's school.
And prices as well. They're moving once you've sold up in town.
Exactly. So now, it would be the outskirts. But yes, now that my children are sort of older and, more independent, that's the plan. And I hope I haven't become too institutionalised and I can do it.
Too ruralised. Well, good luck, Jane. Thank you. I'm not going to offer you Nick Clegg's house. I think that would be inappropriate in the circumstances. Besides, it's already gone. 12:36 is the time. On the question of tariffs, this 84% tariffs that China have now imposed upon the US, I'd said to you about 2 weeks ago, I don't know how you keep track of this stuff, but what an interesting little aside that you may have missed is that some Chinese, I think the Chinese Foreign Office or whatever the equivalent of the Foreign Office is in China, dug out a clip I'm about to play you featuring quite a well-known American politician who arguably has one of the most distinctive voices in the history of English-speaking politics. So I'm not going to tell you who it is. It's definitely real, but it's interesting that it was found by the Chinese and other people may have been aware of it, but certainly they were responsible for it going viral over the last few days. And it involves a discussion of precisely the kind of behaviour that we're seeing now. And I'll give you one clue. You don't need a clue as to who it is. It's blooming obvious, especially to Frankie Goes to Hollywood fans. But the difference, I went back to where we started the show with Max Hastings' article in the Times today. The difference between the Republican Party pre-Trump and the Republican Party now is like the difference between the city and the countryside, or the difference between chalk and cheese, or the difference between normal democracy and fascism. But this is what it... And this guy is by no means towards the centre or the left of the Republican movement. But this is how American presidents used to sound on the subject of tariffs.
You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity. Now, it hasn't always been easy. There are those in the Congress, just as there were back in the 30s, who want to go for the quick political advantage, who risk America's prosperity for the sake of a short-term appeal to some special interest group.
Incredible, right? And I mean, almost describing explicitly his successor as a Republican president of the United States of America. I suppose I sometimes presume you're my age. So that was Ronald Reagan, the kind of president, the president of the United States, roughly around the time Margaret Thatcher was prime minister of this country, if you need a little bit of historical context. So there it is. Extra points if you can explain the Frankie Goes to Hollywood reference and double points. I think it was Malcolm. I've lost the message to saying that made-up name, Brian James, he said, sounds like the bassist from a 1970s rock band. Well, there is a real Brian James, and we recently lost him. He was the guitarist, the founding guitarist with The Damned. He passed away age 70 last month, so we should mention that. It's a weird coincidence. 12 for a brilliant band and a superb guitarist. It's 12:40. Regretting, rural regrets, we'd call it, wouldn't we, if we were North Norfolk Digital? Rural regrets. Moved to the country. Can't believe how awful it is. Stephen's in Exeter. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Great show as always, mate.
Thank you, Stephen.
So to give a little bit of context, I met my wife when she was studying a PhD in law in Newcastle. She qualified and then she got a teaching job down here at Exeter University. And then I moved down on the proviso that we got married, which we did. And now we have two lovely daughters, two very young daughters. And I just want to start by saying this is not an attack on Devon. It's a beautiful place. It's a great place to raise children. You've got beaches on your doorstep, great countryside, Dartmoor, which is beautiful. However, I found since moving down here that people are a lot less friendly.
Okay.
So, for example, when I was growing up in Newcastle, if I went for a run in the morning, and I'd say good morning to a dog walker or someone walking past, they'd always say good morning or hello back, and they'd always be really friendly. Whereas when I moved down here, I'd carry on doing the same thing, and I'd say like 1 out of 5 people would give you a response, and that shocked me because I just assumed that everyone in the country would be doing the same thing. It's just something that I was used to, and I didn't realise that in my experience anyway, but other people's experiences will be different, but in my experience, people, because when I go back there, I'm just reminded of how friendly and how welcoming people are. And
I think that's a northern thing. Isn't it? It's not just the northeast, because my mum is from Sheffield, and she's the kind of person who would start a conversation on a bus. I'll tell you what she'd do, mate. She'd start conversations on public transport when she came to visit us in London, and I'd be like, Mum, shut up. People don't do that here. Don't start talking to someone about, something they... Oh, have you been to a nice shop? You've been to Harrods? Mum will start a conversation with anyone, and that's not abnormal in Yorkshire or indeed in the northeast, but the further south you come, I thought maybe it stopped at London and then got better as you moved further south. As you head down towards Devon and Cornwall, it got better again, but maybe not.
Well, I'm a delivery driver, and I deliver all over Devon. I'm currently in North Devon today, and we deliver to pubs and restaurants.
Yes.
And I'll very often I'll stop and start some sort of idle chat or small talk, and I don't really get anything back. Like I try and spare a couple of minutes, 3 minutes to start how the day's going and things like that. And
not interested.
The feeling I get is that they just want me to get back on the van and carry on.
It could just be your social skills, Stephen, or your quality of banter.
Well, I don't know about the latter.
It seems all right to me, but you've got a big issue with incomers. I think that's where the word grockle comes from. I think it's Devon, that people who aren't from Devon are called grockles, isn't it?
Well, we used to holiday down here all the time growing up, and I think, from what I remember, my parents would always say, not as nice down there as you are up here.
Yes. Because you're on holiday, so you've got that weird rose-tinted light with the drink. So it's like something happens to your senses, and you don't realise what it would be like all the time. I mean, places like Blackpool are extraordinary. When I was young, now it's different, because Blackpool's had a terrible time of it, but Blackpool would be like the Las Vegas of the North when I was a kid, and we'd go quite often. But of course, for 6 months of the year, there's next to nothing going on there. So you've got the weird seasonality of a place, and you've got no idea what it's going to be like in winter, but you've also got a slight resistance in some parts of non-urban Britain. You've got a slight resistance to incomers, which might be why some of the racist rhetoric works so well. Because I'm always baffled by why Faragists have got such a problem with London, which is one of the most multicultural melting pots on the planet. But of course, the answer would be that if you are mildly racist, and the idea of lots of people moving into where you live who don't look like you can be weaponized. It can be turned into something awful. And God forbid you even have a brown-skinned mayor or a Muslim mayor. And that is how you weaponize racism in this country. But incredibly, it's what they've managed to do in the United States as well, using London as an example, despite the fact that almost everybody who lives here would not want to live anywhere else in a million years. Thank you, Stephen. City versus country, or seaside, or whatever it may be, continues. But I've also got a fascinating little nugget for you that plays very neatly into the tariff war in the United States, being the new Brexit. What's the line you think of most when you think of the people who defended it or said that Brexit would be a good idea, that made them most stupid? I know I use that word a bit too much. Let's just say wrong. So what's the single line? Remember when we used to do a mantra? I used to be able to trip them off my tongue like a child reciting the alphabet. I'd have all the lines that David Davis had used, or that Digby Pudding Jones had used, or that Rees-Mogg or Farage, all the lines that they'd used, which quickly became absolutely untrue. What do you think the biggest one was? What was the most frequently used and very quickly revealed to be the most wrong? A neat, pithy line, a throwaway line, almost a proverb, almost like an epithet or a figure of speech. And they were all using it when they were talking about why we wouldn't suffer from leaving the European Union. And then I'll give you the 2025 version after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. Respectfully, I don't think even in Donald Trump's administration anybody is going to say the German car industry won't let the bad stuff happen to us. So that's not the answer to the question of what echo of Brexit madness. Did he really say that? Did David Davis really say it's all up here when he turned up for that opening negotiation and the European Union negotiators had like filing cabinets full of paperwork and he just had a cheesy grin and a Parker pen? I think he might. It's all up here. He was the fella who, of course, said two things that were of epic stupidity that nobody really pointed out at the time except us. First thing he said was the thing about the German car industry. And the second thing he says is the day after Brexit, we won't be in Brussels, we'll be in Berlin striking trade deals. So the chief negotiator of Brexit didn't know that individual members are not allowed to strike individual trade deals. It's a single market. Absolute Herbert. Anyway, here is a current member of Caroline Levitt, the White House spokesperson, speaking at a White House press conference yesterday. See if you can spot the echo, the recurring theme.
In total, since the Liberation Day announcement, nearly 70 countries have already reached out to the president to begin a negotiation. Countries are falling over themselves to reform their unfair trade practices and free open their markets to our country. Why? Because these countries greatly respect President Trump and the sheer power of the American market. These countries realize they've gotten filthy rich over the past few decades by imposing substantial tariffs on American-made products and ridiculous non-monetary barriers to block out American industry. The jig is up. Past American presidents sat by and let this happen, but President Trump stood up for our country, and he is saying no more. The president's message has been simple and consistent from the beginning. To countries around the world, bring us your best offers, and he will listen. Deals will only be made if they benefit American workers and address our nation's crippling trade deficits. America does not need other countries as much as other countries need us.
Did you spot it? There was a lot of build-up, but you remember the big, it's not word for word, but goodness me, it's similar.
America does not need other countries as much as other countries need us.
Now, in the case of the United States of America, there is probably actually some truth in it. It's just that with Brexit, when they said they need us more than we need them, there wasn't. I like this from Ben. The only thing I remember about David Davis was that because of him, you got that Swiss David Davis thing made. Oh, those were the days. Do you remember that? Charlie Hickson did it for us. Charlie Hickson, Swiss Tony out of the File Show, actually did a David Davis takeoff when he was talking about how negotiating trade deals is like making love to a beautiful woman. You've got to know the File Show to know why that's funny, but goodness me, that was a moment, wasn't it? Yeah, that's probably a Brexit benefit. We did have some fun together. Back to city versus countryside. Robert's in Highgate, which is one of those rare areas of the capital that can sort of qualify as both countryside and city. Robert, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello.
Hello, James. It's Bobby here. Robert, how are you doing? You all right?
Very good, mate. What's on your mind?
Oh, basically, I was just talking. I was listening to the conversation while I was cooking about the north-south divide, countryside versus the city, and as somebody who's moved down south about 15 years ago, I still have connections in the north of England.
Yes,
but I do find, from my perspective, that London is a very tolerant city compared to anywhere in UK.
That's what they hate. That might be what they hate about it, actually. So certain types of people. It's proof that all their theories are wrong.
Yes, it does. And I think even when I speak to friends, the concept of London is a really, it's an evil place full of foreigners, full of, they're building mosques in the Buckingham Palace and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
So there's no true concept of what they have in the city, what's in London. But from my perspective, as somebody who's moved from farming communities in the north of England and moved to the city because of my work,
yes,
I was quite reluctant because of all this propaganda I heard about the negatives about Southerners and all that sort of stuff. But what I found, and I know it's going to be a bit controversial, I found it a lot more friendly here in London than I have anywhere else in the UK. I mean, I'll go for a jog, I can speak to anybody. When I'm walking around, I'll speak to people on the bus stop. I've seen things in the city there's no way I would see in the north of England, how helpful people are.
Gosh.
And I spent 27 years of my life in the north of England before I moved here. And what I find is, and this is extremely controversial what I'm going to say, but the first time I ever met a nice white person is when I moved to London.
Good Lord. Because by which you mean sort of casual bigotries that wouldn't the person who holds them wouldn't really even know that they were being offensive often. Yeah, it's just a lack of, you've seen Monty Python, Trade of the Outside and all that, It can be very localized. Insular, yeah, that's correct. But whereas I find, and it's unfair to slate the north of England because there is a lack of opportunities, lack of access. I mean, there's HS2 and all this sort of stuff, keeping people connected. And access to the world raises education and attainment and access to different people. But it's sad to think, I would never, ever move to the countryside as much as there's farming in my blood. And I love cows and I love cattle and I love spending time in the open air in the countryside. But there's no way I would move. But move back to. I wonder what the breakdown is. What are you cooking, Robert? I'm making meatballs and a spicy meatball sort of dish today. That's not a bit early. Very northern, so it's a bit early, isn't it, to be doing that? To be was that for tonight? Well, the theory is, eat breakfast like a king. Yes. And lunch like a prince, and then then tail off in the evening. And what are you using? Beef or veal? Oh, beef. Just beef mince. Yeah, beef mince, yeah, that's right. I like it. And the spicy meatballs. 12:56 is the time. Thank you, Robert. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Quite a few of you objecting to the suggestion that cities aren't as friendly. In Bobby's case, as friendly as the whole of the north. More friendly here than there. So last one on this, I think, to Sarah, who's in Todmorden. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Oh, hiya, James. I'm a city girl through and through. I grew up in the suburbs of Manchester. Bizarrely, you mentioned Burnham Manning earlier. I actually grew up near the Embassy Club. Gosh. And then when I got married in the late 90s, me and my husband actually moved into Manchester city centre, and we'd lived in flats there for 20 years. Bizarrely, in 2017... we made the move out to, we actually live in the Calder Valley now, and it's a little hamlet of a little town called Todmorden. Yes. And it's a 30-minute train journey into Manchester, Victoria. Right. And I was saying to you, the lady I spoke to earlier, as much as I love it out here, and it's beautiful, and it's such a difference to living in the middle of a city, I do miss the mass of people. I used to just be able to walk out of my door and I was on in St Anne's Square and, right in the centre of Manchester. Lovely. And the difference living in a small hamlet is amazing. It's particularly isolating in the winter, I would say. And if I didn't have that rail line, that umbilical cord to Manchester, because I still all my friends and family are still there, so I still have places to crash. I have to go back once a week because I can't I don't know. Maybe it's something about being a Mancunian.
What happens?
I grew up when Manchester was at its like cultural height.
What, early 90s? Late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah. I used to go to the House. I used to live opposite.
I was there. I was there in 1991. I lived there. Would you believe?
You were probably knocking around. I'm a year older than you, so you were probably doing all the same stuff.
In the same clubs. The horse and jockey in Chorlton come hardy to get in the mood, and then down into town, try and get into the hacienda, and if you couldn't get into the hacienda, around the corner to the venue.
The venue on Friday night was still a glorious club.
What happens when you get off the train then? What do you feel when you get off the train, when you get back?
It's like I've come home.
Is it?
It's the weirdest feeling. And I love where I live now.
Clearly.
It's beautiful. I mean, yesterday, for example, my dad came up on the train. We went up to Hebden Bridge and walked up to Heptonstall and Sylvia Plath's grave. And it was beautiful. It was lovely. We had a fantastic day, and I wouldn't miss that for the world. But, oh, my God, I do, especially in the winter. God,
there is a difference. There is. I suppose this is why posh people have always had one place in town and one place in the country as well, so that they can enjoy the best of both worlds. You like this one, Sheila? I grew up in Liverpool.
Yeah.
The most wonderfully friendly people, except towards Boris Johnson. With him, we wear our casual bigotry with pride.
Yeah, you see, I think with maybe it's because I've not lived there for a long time. Liverpool is the people of Liverpool are either utterly fabulous, funny, welcoming, warm, and in my experience, most of them are, or they're absolute maniacs, particularly when you put them behind the wheel of a car.
Interesting.
Yeah, there you go.
If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. I'm safe back from Birmingham, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
Oh, it's going through the wars, but it's not actually a war zone.
Well, it's the rats, though. It's the rats.
Hideous.
James O'Brien on LBC.